A single dad saved a nurse during an explosion, and she became the one who saved his daughter. Sometimes fate doesn't just connect two lives, it binds them in ways no one can explain. This is a story about a man who risked everything for a stranger, only to discover that strangers don't stay strangers when destiny has other plans. Stay with me until the end, and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday evening, hammering against the cracked pavement outside Riverbend General Hospital like 1,000 angry fists. Daniel Ward sat in his truck for a moment longer than necessary, staring through the water-streaked windshield at the sprawling building before him. The headlights cut through the downpour, illuminating the emergency entrance where ambulances sat idle, their red lights casting eerie reflections in the puddles. He didn't want to be here. His shift at the construction site had ended 3 hours ago. His body ached from 10 straight hours of hauling steel beams and concrete blocks under the unforgiving sun that had given way to this storm. His hands were calloused and stained with dirt, his work boots caked with mud. All he wanted was to go home, heat up whatever leftovers were in the fridge, and collapse on the couch while Grace did her homework at the kitchen table. But his supervisor had called him personally. "Ward, I need you to drop off those safety reports to the hospital admin. They're threatening to pull our contract if we don't get the documentation in tonight. I know it's your daughter's night, but I'm asking as a favor. Please." Daniel had closed his eyes, phone pressed to his ear, and thought about the bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the ones with red stamps that said "Final Notice." He thought about Grace's school field trip next month that cost $60 he didn't have. He thought about the way his supervisor's voice had that edge to it, the edge that meant if Daniel said no, there might not be a job waiting for him tomorrow. "I'll be there in 20, Daniel had said. Now, sitting in the hospital parking lot with the engine idling, he felt the familiar weight settle over his shoulders, the weight of being alone, of being both mother and father to an 8-year-old girl who deserved so much more than cold pizza and a dad who was always too tired to play catch. The weight of knowing that one wrong move, one missed paycheck, could send their whole fragile world tumbling down. He grabbed the manila folder from the passenger seat, tucked it under his jacket, and pushed open the truck door. The rain hit him like a wall, immediately soaking through his clothes. He ran toward the entrance, boots splashing through puddles, and burst through the automatic doors into the fluorescent-lit lobby. The warmth inside was almost suffocating after the cold rain. Daniel stood for a moment, water dripping from his hair and jacket, catching his breath. The lobby was quieter than he'd expected. Just a few people scattered in the waiting area, a receptionist behind a glass partition, and the distant sound of a television playing the evening news. "Can I help you?" The receptionist looked up, her expression hovering between concern and annoyance at the trail of water he was leaving on the floor. "I need to drop these off for administration. Safety reports for the construction contract?" Daniel held up the folder, now slightly damp at the edges. The woman sighed, glancing at her watch. "Administrative offices are closed. You'll have to come back tomorrow." "I was told they needed these tonight, please. I drove all the way across town." Something in his voice must have registered because her expression softened slightly. "Hold on." She picked up a phone, pressed a few buttons, and waited. After a moment, she spoke quietly into the receiver, then hung up. "Someone's coming down. Wait over there." Daniel nodded his thanks and moved toward a row of plastic chairs. He didn't sit. His clothes were too wet. Instead, he stood there, folder clutched in his hands, feeling out of place in this sterile environment. The smell of disinfectant and something else, something medical and vaguely unsettling, filled his nostrils. He checked his phone. 7:43 p.m. Grace would be finishing her homework about now. He'd asked Mrs. Chen from next door to sit with her for an hour, promising he'd be back before bedtime. Mrs. Chen was kind, but she was elderly, and Daniel hated imposing, hated that his daughter spent so many evenings with a neighbor instead of her father. The elevator dinged, and a man in his 50s emerged, wearing a hospital ID badge and an expression of professional impatience. "You're the construction guy?" "Yes, sir, Daniel Ward. I have the safety reports you requested." The man walked over, took the folder without ceremony, and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the first page. "These should have been here 3 days ago. I understand there were some delays with—" "I don't need excuses. I need compliance. The man closed the folder. Wait here. I need to verify these are complete before you leave. Before Daniel could respond, the man turned and walked down a corridor to the left, disappearing through a set of double doors. Daniel let out a long breath. Of course, it couldn't be simple. Nothing in his life was ever simple. He glanced around the lobby again. A young couple sat huddled together, the woman crying softly into the man's shoulder. An elderly man in a wheelchair stared blankly at the television mounted on the wall. A teenager scrolled through his phone, leg bouncing with nervous energy. All these people with their own problems, their own weight to carry. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Grace. When are you coming home? Mrs. Chen fell asleep on the couch, LOL. He smiled despite himself and typed back. Soon, sweetheart. Be good. The lights flickered. Daniel looked up, frowning. The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed, dimmed, then returned to normal. The receptionist glanced up from her computer, looking momentarily concerned, then shrugged and went back to whatever she was doing. Something felt wrong. Daniel couldn't explain it, just a sudden tightness in his chest, an instinct that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The same instinct that had saved him more than once on construction sites, that split-second awareness that told him to move before a cable snapped or a beam swung loose. The lights flickered again, longer this time. And then he smelled it. Gas. Faint but unmistakable, the sharp chemical odor cutting through the antiseptic hospital smell. Daniel's training kicked in immediately. He'd worked enough demolition sites, enough old buildings to recognize that smell anywhere. Hey, he called out to the receptionist. Do you smell that? She looked up, annoyed. Smell what? Gas. Natural gas? You need to evacuate. Now. The woman's expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. She stood up, sniffing the air. I do smell something. Where's the administrative wing? Which direction? Down that hall, but you can't just... Daniel was already moving. He didn't know why. Didn't stop to think about protocol or safety, or the fact that this wasn't his problem. He just knew that somewhere in this building there was a gas leak. And in his experience, gas leaks didn't just fix themselves. He ran down the corridor where the administrator had gone, his wet boots squeaking on the linoleum. The smell grew stronger with every step. The hallway branched off in multiple directions, signs pointing to radiology, emergency, administration, physical therapy. Hello? Daniel called out. Is anyone down here? No response. He turned left, following the strongest concentration of the smell. The fluorescent lights above him flickered more frequently now, creating a strobe effect that made the empty hallway feel surreal, dreamlike. The doors along the corridor were all closed, small windows showing dark offices within. Then he heard it, voices, coming from around the corner. Daniel broke into a run. 2 nurses stood outside a door, one of them on her phone, the other waving her hand in front of her face. Yes, I'm telling you, there's a strong smell of gas on the 3rd floor, West Wing. We need someone from maintenance down here, right? The explosion happened so fast that Daniel's mind couldn't process it as a single event. Instead, it broke down into fragments, each one seared into his memory with perfect clarity. The orange flash of light from inside the room, the sound, not just loud but felt, a pressure wave that hit his entire body like a physical blow. The door blowing outward, glass and wood fragmenting into 1,000 projectiles. The 2 nurses thrown backward by the blast, their bodies ragdoll limp. The floor beneath his feet shaking, tiles cracking. And Daniel himself, lifted off his feet and thrown into the wall behind him, his head cracking against concrete, stars exploding across his vision. For a moment, maybe seconds, maybe longer, everything went dark. When awareness returned, it came with pain, screaming, all-encompassing pain in his back, his head, his arms. The smell of smoke and burning plastic filled his lungs, making him cough violently. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out almost everything else. Daniel forced his eyes open. The hallway was chaos, debris everywhere, ceiling tiles hanging down, exposed wires sparking. The lights were completely out now, replaced by an eerie orange glow from small fires that had ignited along the walls. Thick black smoke was already gathering near the ceiling, rolling down in toxic clouds. He tried to stand and nearly collapsed. His left leg wouldn't support his weight properly. Gritting his teeth, Daniel grabbed onto the wall and pulled himself up. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his body. "Help!" The voice was weak, barely audible over the ringing in his ears and the crackling of flames. Daniel turned his head, trying to locate it through the smoke. "Please, someone." There. Through the haze, he could see one of the nurses who'd been standing outside the room. She was lying maybe 20 feet away, conscious but bleeding from a gash on her forehead. Beyond her, the other nurse lay motionless. Daniel stumbled toward the conscious woman, his vision swimming. "I'm coming. Hold on." "My leg," she gasped as he reached her. I can't move it." He looked down and saw her right leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Broken, definitely. "It's going to be okay. We need to get you out of here." "My friend, Lena, she was in there." The nurse pointed with a shaking hand toward the destroyed room, tears streaming down her face. "She went in to check on a patient. She's still in there." Daniel looked at the doorway, or what was left of it. Flames licked up the frame, and inside he could see nothing but smoke and debris. No one could survive in there. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he heard it. A cough. Faint, strangled, but definitely there. "I'll get her," Daniel heard himself say. "You can't. The ceiling. It's going to collapse." But he was already moving, leaving the injured nurse behind. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to turn around, to get out, to save himself. He had a daughter at home. Grace needed him. He couldn't die in a hospital hallway trying to play hero for people he didn't even know. Yet his feet kept moving forward. The heat hit him the moment he crossed the threshold. Intense, like opening an oven. Daniel pulled his already wet jacket over his mouth and nose, crouched low where the air was slightly clearer, and pushed into the burning room. It had been some kind of storage area, metal shelving units now twisted and toppled, boxes and supplies scattered everywhere, many of them feeding the flames. The explosion had originated from somewhere near the back wall, where a massive hole now gaped, exposing pipes and wiring. "Hello?" Daniel called out, his voice muffled by the jacket. "Can you hear me?" Another cough, closer now. To his right, behind a fallen shelving unit. Daniel scrambled over debris, his hands immediately finding sharp edges, cutting through his palms, leaving wet trails of blood. He didn't care. He reached the shelving unit and looked behind it. A woman lay pinned beneath a steel support beam that had fallen across her chest and left arm. She was maybe 30, with dark hair matted with blood and dust, her blue scrubs torn and stained. Her eyes found his, wide with pain and fear and desperate hope. "Please," she whispered. "I can't breathe." The beam was massive, easily 300 pounds. Daniel looked around frantically for leverage, for anything he could use. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat more intense. They had maybe minutes, if that, before this whole section came down. His hands found the beam and he positioned himself, planting his feet as best he could on the unstable debris. "When I lift, you pull yourself out. Understand?" She nodded, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. Daniel took a breath, immediately regretted it as smoke filled his lungs, and pulled. The beam didn't budge. He tried again, every muscle in his back and arms straining, his injured leg threatening to give out. Nothing. "Come on!" he roared, not sure if he was talking to the beam, to himself, or to God. He repositioned, getting lower, and this time he didn't pull. He lifted with his legs, the way he'd been taught to lift heavy equipment on job sites. His vision went red at the edges, his head pounding from the earlier impact with the wall, but the beam moved. Just an inch, but it moved. The woman gasped, trying to wriggle free, but she was stuck. "More," she cried. "Just a little more." Daniel's entire body shook with the effort. He could feel something tearing in his shoulder, his hand slipping on the blood-slicked metal. Somewhere behind him, something collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending up a fresh wave of heat and smoke. With a sound that was half scream, half sob, Daniel lifted the beam another few inches. The woman pulled herself free, scrambling backward on her good arm, her left one hanging limp. The moment she was clear, Daniel dropped the beam. It crashed down with a clang that he felt through the floor. He grabbed her around the waist with one arm, hauling her up. "We have to go, now!" They stumbled toward the doorway together, her weight heavy against him, both of them coughing violently. The smoke was so thick now that Daniel could barely see 3 feet ahead. He kept one hand on the wall, following it, praying he was going the right direction. Behind them, the ceiling groaned, a deep, ominous sound that Daniel knew meant they had seconds at most. "Move, move, move!" He pushed her forward, and they burst through the doorway into the corridor just as the ceiling collapsed behind them with a deafening roar. The blast of air and debris threw them both forward, and they tumbled together across the floor, rolling to a stop in a tangle of limbs. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't move, couldn't think, could only lie there on the cold linoleum, every part of his body screaming in agony while his lungs fought for clean air. "Thank you." The woman, Lena, the other nurse had called her, was crying, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Emergency lights had kicked in, bathing everything in red. People were shouting, running. The hospital's fire alarm shrieked. Daniel managed to sit up, his head spinning. The woman he'd pulled from the room was in bad shape, her left arm clearly broken, blood seeping from multiple cuts, her breathing labored. But she was alive. "We need to get you to—" he started, but she cut him off. "I'm a nurse. I know. But first—" She looked around frantically. "Mara, my colleague, where is she?" Daniel looked back toward where the other nurse had been lying. Several hospital staff members had arrived, and they were already surrounding her, assessing her condition. One of them looked up and caught his eye, giving a small nod. She was being taken care of. Paramedics flooded the hallway, along with firefighters in full gear. Someone grabbed Daniel's shoulder, trying to check his injuries, but he shrugged them off. "I'm fine. Help her first." "Sir, you're bleeding." "I said I'm fine." The words came out harsher than he intended. Daniel struggled to his feet, ignoring the paramedics' protests. His hands were cut up badly, his clothes were ruined, and he could feel dozens of small injuries that would hurt like hell tomorrow. But he could walk. He could breathe. Grace. He needed to get home to Grace. "Sir, please, at least let us treat your hands. I have to go." Daniel backed away from them, from the chaos, from the woman with the dark hair who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read through the pain and shock in her eyes. "Wait," she called out as the paramedics moved in to stabilize her. "What's your name?" But Daniel was already walking away, limping down the hallway toward the exit. Behind him, more of the corridor collapsed, sending up fresh clouds of dust and smoke. Firefighters rushed past him, heading toward the devastation. He made it to the lobby, which had transformed into a disaster zone. People everywhere, some injured, others just panicked. The receptionist who'd checked him in was sitting against a wall, being treated for shock. The administrator who'd taken his safety reports was shouting into a phone, his face red with stress. Daniel pushed through the automatic doors and back out into the rain. It felt good against his burned skin, cleansing. He walked to his truck on autopilot, climbed in, and sat there for a moment, hands shaking on the steering wheel. What had he just done? He'd risked his life, not in some dramatic, thought-out way, but impulsively, stupidly. If he died in there, Grace would have been alone, orphaned. Everything he'd worked for, every sacrifice he'd made to keep them together, would have been for nothing. And yet, when he'd heard that woman coughing, trapped beneath that beam, he hadn't hesitated. Daniel looked down at his hands. They were a mess, deep cuts across both palms, the beginning of burns on his forearms where his jacket had ridden up, blood mixed with the rainwater dripping from his clothes, staining the seat beneath him. He should go back. Let them treat his injuries. File an incident report. Do all the things a responsible person was supposed to do. Instead, he started the truck. The drive home was a blur. Every red light felt like an eternity, every turn sending fresh jolts of pain through his abused body. But finally, he pulled up in front of the small duplex he and Grace called home. Mrs. Chen's light was still on next door. Daniel dragged himself out of the truck and up the front steps. His hands shook so badly that he could barely get the key in the lock. When he finally managed to open the door, he found Mrs. Chen standing in the living room, her eyes wide with alarm. "Daniel, what happened to you?" "I'm okay, just... There was an accident at the hospital. Is Grace? She's asleep. Has been for half an hour. But you need a doctor." "I'm fine." The lie felt automatic at this point. Thank you for watching her. I'm sorry I was longer than I said. Mrs. Chen looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression must have stopped her. She gathered her things, a knitting project, her reading glasses, and moved toward the door. You're a good man, Daniel Ward, but you need to take care of yourself too. That little girl needs her father. I know. The words came out barely above a whisper. After she left, Daniel locked the door and stood in the silent living room. Grace's homework was neatly stacked on the kitchen table. She was a good kid, always did what she was supposed to. Her backpack sat by the door, ready for school tomorrow. The remnants of the dinner Mrs. Chen had made her, looked like spaghetti, were washed and drying in the rack. Normal. Everything so perfectly, painfully normal. Daniel walked down the short hallway to Grace's room and eased the door open. In the glow of her nightlight, a plastic star that she'd insisted on keeping even though she claimed she was too old for nightlights, he could see her sleeping peacefully, her brown hair spread across the pillow, her favorite stuffed bear clutched in one arm. She looked so much like her mother in that moment that it took his breath away. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, to remind himself why he'd come home instead of staying at the hospital. But his clothes were filthy and wet, and the last thing he wanted was to wake her with questions about his injuries that he didn't know how to answer. So he just stood there in the doorway, watching her breathe, and let himself feel the full weight of how close he'd come to leaving her alone in the world. I'm sorry, he whispered, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. For risking his life? For not being there for dinner? For all the ways he fell short of being the father she deserved? Grace stirred, but didn't wake. Daniel pulled the door closed and made his way to the bathroom. The face that looked back at him from the mirror was almost unrecognizable. Soot-stained, blood-smeared, with a purple bruise blooming along his left cheekbone where he'd hit the wall. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. He looked like a stranger. Daniel turned on the shower and stripped off his ruined clothes, leaving them in a sodden pile on the floor. Under the hot water, he finally let himself acknowledge the pain. His hands were in bad shape. He'd need to wrap them carefully so Grace wouldn't see in the morning. The cut on his shoulder was deeper than he'd thought, still seeping blood. Dozens of smaller burns and cuts covered his arms and back. He stood under the spray until the water ran clear, until some of the shaking subsided, until he could almost convince himself that tonight had been just another rough day at work. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was that woman's face, Lena's face, looking up at him from beneath that beam, terror and hope warring in her expression. He could hear her voice, cracked with smoke and pain. Please, I can't breathe. And he'd saved her. Whatever else happened, whatever consequences came from tonight, he'd pulled her out of that burning room. She was alive because he'd made a choice to run toward danger instead of away from it. Daniel wrapped his hands in gauze from the medicine cabinet, doing the best he could with awkward, painful movements. He found a clean t-shirt and sweatpants, took 3 ibuprofen, and made his way to the couch. Sleep should have been impossible, but exhaustion claimed him almost immediately, pulling him down into dark, dreamless depths. He woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Grace standing over him, her face scrunched with concern. Dad? Why are you sleeping on the couch? And what happened to your hands? Daniel sat up slowly, his entire body one massive ache. Morning, sweetheart. I just had a rough day at work yesterday. Nothing serious. Your hands are all bandaged. Occupational hazard, construction work, remember? He forced a smile. What do you want for breakfast? Grace studied him with the 2 knowing eyes of a child who'd learned early that adults didn't always tell the truth. Dad, are you okay? Really? I'm fine, Gracie. I promise. Another lie, but a necessary one. Now go get ready for school. I'll make pancakes. She hesitated for another moment, then nodded and headed back to her room. Daniel hauled himself off the couch, biting back a groan as every muscle protested. In the kitchen, he somehow managed to mix batter and work the stove despite his bandaged hands. The familiar routine helped, measuring, pouring, flipping. Normal things. Safe things. By the time Grace emerged, dressed and ready for school, he had a stack of slightly lopsided pancakes waiting for her. They ate together in comfortable silence, And for a few minutes, Daniel could almost pretend that last night had been a dream. Almost. After he walked Grace to the bus stop and watched her climb aboard with her backpack bouncing, Daniel returned home and collapsed on the couch. He needed to call work to explain why he wouldn't be coming in today, needed to do something about his hands, which were throbbing despite the painkillers, needed to figure out how to pay the bills when he'd probably just lost his job for abandoning those safety reports in the middle of a disaster. But for now, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling, and wondered about the woman he'd pulled from the fire. Lena. Was she okay? Had her injuries been treated? Would she even remember the face of the man who'd carried her out of that burning room? His phone rang, making him jump. Unknown number. Daniel answered cautiously. Hello? Is this Daniel Ward? A woman's voice, professional and slightly concerned. Yes? Who is this? This is Susan Martinez from Riverbend General Hospital's Human Resources Department. We've been trying to locate you. You left the hospital last night before we could get your information, and we need to file a report about the incident. Also, we wanted to thank you personally for— I don't need thanks. Daniel cut her off. Is everyone okay? The nurses who were hurt? A pause. One is in stable condition with a broken leg and some lacerations. The other, Lena Brooks, she has a broken arm and required treatment for smoke inhalation and several burns. But thanks to you, Mr. Ward, she's going to make a full recovery. If you hadn't pulled her out when you did— She didn't need to finish the sentence. I'm glad she's okay, Daniel said quietly. We'd like you to come back to the hospital so we can properly treat your injuries, and I appreciate it, but I'm fine. Really. I just did what anyone would have done. Mr. Ward, I have to go. Thank you for calling. He hung up before she could respond, then turned off his phone completely. The last thing he needed was attention or recognition or questions about why he'd been there in the first place. He just wanted to forget the whole thing, to move on, to keep his head down and his life simple. But later that afternoon, when Grace came home from school, she was carrying a newspaper someone had left on the bus. Dad, look! She thrust the paper at him, her eyes wide with excitement. There was an explosion at the hospital. It says a mysterious hero saved a nurse's life. Daniel's stomach dropped as he looked at the headline. Mystery Man Rescues Nurse from Hospital Explosion. Below it was a grainy photo taken from security footage, showing a figure in dark clothes carrying someone through smoke-filled hallways. The figure was too blurry to identify clearly, but Daniel knew exactly who it was. That's so cool, Grace said, bouncing with energy. I wonder who he is. The article says the nurse wants to find him to thank him. Dad, what if it was like a superhero or something? Daniel set the paper down carefully, his bandaged hands shaking slightly. I don't think it was a superhero, honey, just someone who was in the right place at the right time. Still, I hope they find him. He deserves a reward or something. Maybe, Daniel said softly, or maybe he just wants to be left alone. Grace gave him another one of those searching looks but didn't press. She wandered off to do her homework, leaving Daniel alone with the newspaper and his thoughts. He read the article despite himself. It quoted Lena Brooks. I don't even know his name. He appeared out of nowhere, lifted a beam that should have been impossible to move, and carried me out of that fire. I was unconscious for part of it, but I remember his voice telling me I was safe. I remember his hands, cut and bleeding from the debris, but he wouldn't let anyone help him. He just disappeared. I need to find him. I need to thank him for giving me my life back. Daniel folded the newspaper and threw it in the recycling bin. He didn't need thanks, didn't want recognition. He'd done what he had to do, and now it was over. In a few days, the story would fade from the news. People would forget. Life would return to normal. That's what Daniel told himself as he made dinner that night, as he helped Grace with her math homework, as he tucked her into bed and kissed her forehead. That's what he tried to believe as he lay in his own bed later, staring at the ceiling, his hands aching and his mind replaying those moments in the burning room over and over again. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, Daniel knew that something had changed. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, made a connection that couldn't be severed simply by walking away. He'd saved Lena Brooks' life. And somehow, though he didn't know it yet, that single act would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. for both of them. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping gently against the window like a reminder of that night. Daniel closed his eyes and tried to sleep, tried to quiet the voice in his head that kept asking the same question over and over. What happens next? 2 weeks passed before Daniel's hands healed enough to return to work. The cuts had been deeper than he'd initially thought, requiring daily cleaning and fresh bandages that Grace helped him apply each morning with a concentration that made his heart ache. She never asked again about that night, but he caught her watching him sometimes with questions in her eyes that she was too afraid to voice. The construction site felt different when he finally went back. Or maybe he was the one who'd changed. He stood at the edge of the building's 3rd floor, looking down at the organized chaos below. Workers calling to each other, machinery beeping, the smell of concrete and metal and sweat, and felt disconnected from it all, like he was watching someone else's life through a window. "Ward!" His supervisor, Mike Chen, appeared beside him, hard hat askew and clipboard in hand. "Good to have you back, man. How are the hands?" "Better. Almost back to normal." Mike studied him for a moment, his weathered face creased with concern. "You know, you could have sued the hospital. Gas leak, explosion, no warning. That's negligence. My brother-in-law's a lawyer," he says. "I don't want to sue anyone, Mike." "Yeah, well..." Mike shuffled his papers, uncomfortable. "For what it's worth, that thing you did, pulling that nurse out, that took guts. My wife saw you on the news, or she says she did. That security footage was pretty grainy. I told her, that's my guy, Daniel Ward, and she didn't believe me. Said you don't seem like the hero type." Daniel turned away from the edge, picking up a measuring tape from the nearby supplies. "She's right. I'm not. Just happened to be there." "Still," Mike clapped him on the shoulder, then headed toward the stairs. "World could use more people who just happen to be there when it counts." The words stayed with Daniel throughout the day, echoing in his mind as he worked. Just happened to be there. Was that all it was? Chance? Coincidence? Or had there been some reason, some purpose to him being in that hospital corridor at that exact moment? He pushed the thoughts away and focused on the work. Measurements, calculations, the familiar rhythm of construction. By the time his shift ended, his hands were sore but functional, and he'd almost convinced himself that life could return to its normal pattern. Then he picked Grace up from after-school care and saw the worry in her teacher's face. "Mr. Ward, could I speak with you for a moment?" Mrs. Peterson pulled him aside while Grace gathered her things, her voice low and careful. "Grace has been a bit distracted lately. She seems tired, and she's complained of stomach aches a few times this week. I wanted to make sure everything's okay at home." Daniel felt the familiar guilt claw at his chest. "She's been sleeping fine, eating normally. I didn't know about the stomach aches." "They might be stress-related, Mrs." Peterson glanced at Grace, who was now waiting by the door, staring at her shoes. "Children her age sometimes internalize anxiety. Has there been any change in routine, anything unusual?" "Everything," Daniel wanted to say. "Everything's unusual. I almost died 2 weeks ago, and I can't stop thinking about it, and maybe she can sense that something's wrong." But instead, he just said, "I'll talk to her. Thank you for letting me know." In the truck on the way home, Daniel tried to broach the subject carefully. "Mrs. Peterson says you haven't been feeling great this week. What's going on, Gracie?" Grace kept her eyes fixed on the passing storefronts. "My stomach hurts sometimes." "Does it hurt now?" "A little. We should see a doctor, just to make sure everything's—" "No!" The vehemence in her voice startled him. She turned in her seat, eyes suddenly wet. "No hospitals, Dad. Please, I don't want to go to a hospital." Daniel pulled over into a parking lot, putting the truck in park. Hey, what's this about? Since when are you scared of doctors?" "Since..." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Since that explosion, the one in the newspaper. What if it happens again? What if we're there and something bad happens?" Understanding crashed over him. Of course, she'd read the article, seen the destruction described in careful newspaper language, and her 8-year-old mind had filled in the terrifying details. And somewhere deep down, maybe she'd sensed his own fear, his own lingering trauma from that night. "Gracie, look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "That was a 1 in a million accident. Hospitals are safe. And if your stomach's hurting, we need to make sure you're okay. That's what doctors are for. They help us feel better. Promise it's safe. I promise. The lie felt necessary, protective. But if your stomach's feeling bad, maybe it's something simple. Have you been eating lunch at school? She hesitated. Sometimes I'm not hungry. Not hungry or no money left on your lunch account? Her silence was answer enough. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, fighting back the wave of frustration. Not at her, never at her, but at himself for not keeping better track. At the system that let kids go hungry because their parents were stretched too thin. At every circumstance that made his daughter feel like she had to hide these things from him. Okay, he said finally. First stop, grocery store. We're getting you stuff you actually like for packed lunches. Then we'll see about that stomachache. Deal? Deal. Her small smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. They spent the next hour in the supermarket, Daniel pushing the cart while Grace carefully selected items, turkey slices, cheese, apple juice boxes, the good cookies that were usually too expensive. He watched the total climb at the register and tried not to think about which bill he'd have to pay late this month to cover it. At home, while Grace did homework at the kitchen table, Daniel made her favorite dinner, chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs, mac and cheese from a box, and green beans because he at least tried to include a vegetable. They ate together, talking about her day, about the book report she had to write, about anything except hospitals and explosions and the things that kept them both awake at night. After Grace went to bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, trying to balance his checking account and failing. The hospital had actually paid him, a Good Samaritan check that came with a liability waiver he'd signed without reading. It had helped, but not enough. Never enough. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, Daniel opened it. Mr. Ward, this is Susan Martinez from Riverbend General HR. I apologize for reaching out again, but Lena Brooks, the nurse you rescued, has been asking about you. She'd really like to speak with you, even just for a few minutes. No pressure, but if you'd be willing to meet with her, it would mean a great deal. She's recovering well, by the way. Please consider it. Daniel stared at the message for a long time. He should delete it, should block the number, should maintain the distance he'd been trying so hard to create between himself and that night. His thumb hovered over the delete button. Instead, he found himself typing, "Is she still at the hospital?" The response came quickly. No, she was discharged last week. She's been doing outpatient physical therapy for her arm. I can arrange a meeting at her convenience. Coffee shop? Neutral location? Daniel set the phone down and rubbed his face with both hands. This was a bad idea. Getting involved, making connections, letting that night become more than just a memory to be filed away. All bad ideas. He had enough complications in his life without adding more. But he kept seeing her face, kept hearing her voice crackling through smoke. Please, I can't breathe. He picked up the phone again. Okay. When? 2 days later, Daniel found himself sitting in a coffee shop on the east side of town, wondering what the hell he was doing. He told Grace he had to run errands, left her with Mrs. Chen again, and driven across Riverbend to meet a woman he barely remembered saving. His hands were sweating despite the autumn chill, and he'd changed his shirt 3 times before leaving the house, which was ridiculous because this wasn't a date or anything close to it. It was just a thank you. Just closure. Just... The door opened and she walked in. Daniel recognized her immediately, even though she looked nothing like the soot-covered, terrified woman from the hospital corridor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her face clean and composed. She wore a soft blue sweater and jeans, and her left arm was in a cast covered with signatures and drawings. She scanned the coffee shop, her eyes uncertain, searching. When her gaze landed on him, recognition flashed across her face. And something else. Relief? Wonder? Daniel couldn't quite read it. He stood up awkwardly, nearly knocking over his coffee cup. Lena? Daniel. She crossed the space between them, and suddenly she was hugging him, carefully, mindful of her cast, but firmly enough that he could feel her trembling. Thank you. God, thank you. I've been trying to find you for 2 weeks, and... She pulled back, and he saw tears on her face. I'm sorry. I promised myself I wouldn't cry. It's okay. Daniel gestured to the chair across from him, and they both sat down. You look good. Better than last time I saw you. She laughed, a slightly watery sound. That's a low bar. I looked like I'd been hit by a truck. How's your arm? Healing. Clean break, they said. Could have been so much worse. She touched the cast self-consciously. The burns were mostly superficial, and my lungs are clearing up. By Christmas, I should be back to normal. Back to work, even, if they'll let me. That's good. Daniel wrapped both hands around his coffee mug, needing something to do with them. I'm glad you're okay. Because of you. Lena leaned forward, her expression intense. Daniel, do you understand what you did? That beam. The firefighter said it weighed over 300 pounds. You lifted it by yourself, and then you carried me out through a burning building that was literally collapsing around us. You saved my life. Anyone would have... No. She cut him off firmly. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have run the other way. The hospital staff, the other people in the building, they evacuated. They did the smart, safe thing, but you ran toward the fire. Why? Daniel stared into his coffee, searching for an answer he didn't have. I heard you coughing. I just couldn't leave. You have a daughter, don't you? When he looked up sharply, she explained, Susan mentioned it. She did some research trying to find you, said you're a single dad, work construction. Daniel, you risked orphaning your child to save someone you'd never met. That's not nothing. That's extraordinary. It was stupid. The words came out harsher than he intended. I should have left it to the professionals. Should have thought about Grace before I... He stopped, shaking his head. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who made an impulsive decision and got lucky that it worked out. Lena was quiet for a moment, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. You don't like attention, do you? That's why you left before anyone could get your information. Why you wouldn't let the paramedics treat you. I don't need attention. I just need to take care of my daughter and keep my job and pay my bills. That's it. That's all I'm trying to do. And that night complicated things. Yeah. Daniel finally met her eyes. It did. She nodded slowly, then reached across the table with her good hand and placed something in front of him. His jacket, the one he'd left at the hospital that night, now cleaned and folded. I wanted to return this, and I wanted to tell you in person what your decision, stupid or not, meant to me. You don't have to... Yes, I do. Her voice was gentle but firm. Daniel, I'm 32 years old. I've been a nurse for 8 years. I love my job, even though it's hard and underpaid and sometimes heartbreaking. I have a younger brother in college who's studying engineering. I have parents who are getting older and depend on me to help them navigate their medical care. I have friends who make me laugh and colleagues who make me better at what I do. I have a whole life, and that night I thought it was ending. I thought I was going to die under that beam, breathing in smoke, and no one would get there in time. She wiped her eyes with her good hand. And then you appeared, like something out of a movie, this stranger who wouldn't give up, who lifted something that should have been impossible to lift, who told me I was safe. You gave me my life back, Daniel. All those things I just mentioned, I still have them because of you. So yes, maybe it complicated your life. Maybe it was impulsive. But it mattered. It mattered more than you can possibly understand. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He wanted to tell her that she was making too much of it, that he wasn't special or brave or anything she seemed to think he was. But the raw gratitude in her voice, the tears on her face, made the words stick. I'm glad you're okay, he said finally. Really, that's all I wanted, for you to be okay. I am, thanks to you. She smiled, then reached into her purse and pulled out a card. I know you want to put this behind you, and I'll respect that. But if you ever need anything at all, please call me. Medical advice, help with healthcare bills, whatever. I mean it. You gave me something I can never repay, but I want to try. Daniel took the card, simple white with her name and phone number in neat printing. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, but I want to help if I can. She stood up, and he did the same. Take care of yourself, Daniel Ward, and that daughter of yours. She's lucky to have a dad who cares so much about doing the right thing. They said goodbye at the coffee shop door, and Daniel watched her walk to her car, moving carefully, still healing but alive, whole. The weight of what she'd said settled over him like a blanket, both comforting and suffocating. He drove home slowly, Lena's card tucked in his wallet, her words echoing in his mind. When he got back, Grace was watching TV with Mrs. Chen, and the normalcy of the scene, his daughter curled up on the couch with her homework finished, the comfortable clutter of their small living room felt almost surreal after the intensity of the conversation he'd just had. "How were your errands?" Mrs. Chen asked as she gathered her things to leave. "Fine. Good." Daniel managed a smile. "Thanks again for watching her." After Mrs. Chen left, Grace bounded over to him. "Dad, guess what? My stomach doesn't hurt anymore. Mrs. Chen made me tea and it was gross, but it worked." "That's great, honey." He pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm glad you're feeling better." They spent the evening like they spent most evenings: homework, dinner, a movie that Grace picked out. Daniel tried to focus, to be present, but his mind kept drifting back to the coffee shop. To Lena's face, as she described her life, all the things she had because he'd made a split-second decision to run into a burning room. Later, after Grace was asleep, Daniel sat on the porch steps in the cool night air, staring at nothing. The street was quiet, most of the neighbors already settled in for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds, normal life. He pulled out his wallet and looked at Lena's card again. On impulse, he took out his phone and saved her number, though he couldn't say why. He wasn't going to call her. This was the end of it. They'd met, she'd said thank you, he'd accepted her gratitude, and now they could both move on with their lives. That was how it was supposed to work. The universe, Daniel would later realize, had other plans. The call came 3 days later, at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night. Daniel was half asleep on the couch, having dozed off during the late news, when his phone rang. He grabbed it without looking at the screen, assuming it was a wrong number, or maybe Mike with some early morning shift emergency. "Hello? Sir, this is Riverbend General Hospital Emergency Department. We have an 8-year-old female patient who was brought in after a motor vehicle accident. She's asking for her father, Daniel Ward. Is this—" Daniel was on his feet before the nurse finished speaking, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Grace? Is that Grace? What happened? Is she—" "Sir, she's stable, but she needs immediate surgery for internal bleeding. We need you to come to the hospital right away. How soon can you, Cha? I'm leaving now. 10 minutes. I'll be there in 10 minutes. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep hold of the phone. "Tell her I'm coming. Tell her Daddy's coming." "We will. Drive safely, Mr. Ward." The next few minutes were a blur of motion, grabbing his keys, running to the truck, barely remembering to lock the front door. His mind couldn't process what he'd heard. Motor vehicle accident, Grace, surgery, internal bleeding. The words jumbled together into a nightmare that couldn't be real, couldn't be happening. Grace had been at a sleepover. Emma Bradshaw's house, 3 streets over. Emma's mom had called earlier to confirm, and Daniel had talked to Grace herself at 8:30. She'd been happy, excited about the movie they were going to watch. How could she be at the hospital? How could there have been an accident? Daniel drove faster than he should have, running one red light, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. He prayed to God, to the universe, to anyone who might be listening, "Please let her be okay. Please. I'll do anything. Just let my baby be okay." The hospital emergency entrance blazed with lights. Daniel parked haphazardly and ran inside, his legs barely supporting him. "My daughter, Grace Ward, they called me. Where is she?" The receptionist was already standing. "Room 7, through those doors, turn left. Dr. Martinez is waiting for you." Daniel burst through the doors into the emergency department. The familiar smell of antiseptic hit him, and for a disorienting moment he was back in that smoke-filled corridor 2 weeks ago. But this was different. This was Grace. This was everything that mattered. A doctor in scrubs met him outside room 7. "Mr. Ward, I'm Dr. Martinez, your daughter." "Where is she? I need to see her." "She's being prepped for surgery right now, but you can see her first." Dr. Martinez's voice was professional but kind. "Mr. Ward, I need you to stay calm for her sake. She's scared and she needs her father to be strong. Can you do that?" Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. The doctor opened the door, and there she was. Grace looked so small on the hospital bed, dwarfed by the equipment surrounding her. Her face was pale, bruised on one side, and there was a cut above her eyebrow that had been bandaged. But her eyes, her beautiful brown eyes, were open and looking for him. "Daddy." The word was barely a whisper, but it cut through Daniel like a blade. He was at her side in an instant, taking her small hand in his, being careful of the IV taped to the back of it. "Hey, baby. Hey, I'm here. Daddy's here." "It hurts." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "My stomach hurts really bad." "I know, sweetheart. I know. But the doctors are going to fix it. You're going to be okay." He looked up at Dr. Martinez desperately. "What happened?" The doctor pulled him slightly away from the bed, speaking in a low voice. "There was an accident. The vehicle she was in was T-boned at an intersection by a drunk driver. The other children had minor injuries, but Grace took the brunt of the impact on her side. She has internal bleeding in her abdomen. We believe it's her spleen. We need to operate immediately." "Operate?" Daniel's vision swam. "How dangerous is it?" "There are always risks with surgery, especially emergency surgery. But Mr. Ward, if we don't operate now, the bleeding will continue. We don't have a choice." Daniel looked back at his daughter, at her pale face and frightened eyes, and felt his world cracking apart. Okay, do it, whatever she needs." A nurse approached with paperwork. "We need your consent to proceed." His hand shook so badly he could barely hold the pen, but Daniel signed. His signature looked like a stranger's, jagged and uncertain. Then he moved back to Grace's bedside. "Gracie, you're going to go with these doctors now, and they're going to make your stomach better. And when you wake up, I'll be right here waiting, okay? Don't leave me." Her grip on his hand tightened. "Promise you won't leave." "I promise, baby. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here the whole time." They wheeled her bed toward the surgical wing, and Daniel walked alongside, holding her hand until the last possible moment. At the double doors marked "Surgery, Authorized Personnel Only," a nurse gently touched his arm. "We'll take good care of her, Mr. Ward. There's a waiting room down the hall. Someone will update you as soon as possible." And then they were gone, pushing Grace through those doors, taking her away from him. Daniel stood frozen in the hallway, feeling like every part of his body had been hollowed out and filled with ice water. "Mr. Ward?" A gentle voice beside him. He turned and saw a woman in scrubs standing there, her face kind and concerned. "Let me show you to the surgical waiting area. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" Daniel's voice broke. "I just need her to be okay." "I understand. Come with me." She led him to a small waiting room with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. A television mounted on the wall played the news with the sound off. Two other families were scattered around the room, their faces bearing the same expression of exhausted worry that Daniel felt etched into his own features. He collapsed into a chair and dropped his head into his hands. How had this happened? Grace had been fine hours ago, laughing, excited about her sleepover. And now she was on an operating table, surgeons cutting into her small body, trying to stop bleeding that could kill her if they failed. Daniel thought about all the times he'd worried about money, about bills, about keeping his job. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except Grace surviving this. He would live in his truck, work 3 jobs, give up everything he had, if she could just be okay. Time moved strangely in that waiting room. Seconds stretched into hours, or maybe minutes compressed into moments. Daniel couldn't tell. He stared at the clock on the wall, watching the hands move with agonizing slowness. 12:15 a.m., 12:47 a.m., 1:23 a.m. Other families came and went. A man received good news about his mother's heart attack and left crying with relief. A couple was called back for bad news, and their wails echoed down the hallway. Each time the door opened, Daniel's heart leaped into his throat, hoping and dreading in equal measure. At 2:06 a.m., the door opened and a nurse appeared. "Family for Grace Ward?" Daniel shot to his feet. "That's me. Is she? She's still in surgery. Dr. Chen wanted me to give you an update. They've located the source of the bleeding and are working to repair it now. Everything is proceeding as expected." "How much longer?" "At least another hour, possibly 2. These things take time, Mr. Ward. Try to rest if you can." Rest. The suggestion was almost laughable. Daniel sank back into his chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He thought about calling someone, Mrs. Chen maybe, or Mike from work. But what would he say? What could anyone do except wait with him? And he didn't have the energy to comfort anyone else right now. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Emma's mom. I'm so sorry. The other driver ran a red light. There was nothing I could do. Please tell me Grace is okay. Please." Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, then turned off his phone. He couldn't deal with that right now, couldn't process blame or apologies or anything beyond the desperate need for his daughter to survive. The minutes crawled by. 2:30 a.m., 3:00 a.m. The waiting room slowly emptied until Daniel was alone with his thoughts and fears. He found himself making bargains with God, with fate, with the universe. Take anything. Take everything. Just let her live. At 3:42 a.m., footsteps approached down the hallway. Daniel looked up and saw a figure in surgical scrubs walking toward the waiting room. Not Dr. Martinez. Someone else. A woman. The door opened and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was Lena. She still had her cast on, and she looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. But her expression was focused, professional, overlaid with something else. Recognition, and underneath that, determination. "Daniel?" She crossed the room quickly. "I just heard. I came as soon as I found out. You..." He struggled to form words. "You're working? I thought you were on medical leave." "I am. I was home when I got the call about a surgical case, pediatric trauma. I volunteer as a surgical nurse sometimes, even when I'm not on duty. I didn't know it was Grace until I saw the chart." She sat down beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "Daniel, she's in good hands. Dr. Chen is one of the best pediatric surgeons we have. If anyone can save her, it's him." "If." The word felt like ash in his mouth. "You said if." "She's going to make it." Lena's voice was firm, certain. "I'm going to make sure of it." "You can't promise that. No one can promise that." "No. But I can promise that I'll be in there with her every second, making sure everything goes right. I'm about to scrub in." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. The woman whose life he'd saved, now standing here ready to save his daughter's. The impossible symmetry of it made his head spin. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do that? You don't owe me." "This isn't about debt." Lena reached out and took his hand, his scarred, calloused hand that had lifted a steel beam 2 weeks ago. "This is about a little girl who needs help, and a father who once ran into a burning building for someone he didn't know. Let me do this, Daniel. Let me be the one who's there for Grace the way you were there for me." Tears burned in Daniel's eyes, the first he'd allowed himself since getting the phone call. "Please save her, please. She's everything. She's all I have." "I know." Lena squeezed his hand gently. "And that's exactly why she's going to be fine. Because she has a father who loves her that much. That kind of love doesn't let go easily." She stood up, but before she could leave, Daniel grabbed her wrist. "Lena, thank you." She looked down at him, and in her eyes he saw the reflection of that moment in the hospital corridor, when he'd told her she was safe, when she'd looked up at him with desperate hope and trust. Now that same trust was being offered back to him, a gift he hadn't known he needed until this moment. "You're welcome," she said softly. Then she turned and walked toward the surgical wing, disappearing through those same double doors that had swallowed his daughter hours earlier. And Daniel sat alone in the waiting room, holding onto the warmth where her hand had touched his, and waited for his world to be either saved or shattered. The minutes after Lana disappeared through those surgical doors felt like centuries. Daniel sat motionless in the hard plastic chair, his body present, but his mind somewhere else entirely, hovering in that operating room with his daughter, willing her heart to keep beating, her blood to keep flowing, her small body to hold on just a little longer. He thought about the first time he'd held Grace. She'd been so tiny, barely 6 pounds, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the entire maternity ward. Her mother, Jennifer, had been exhausted but glowing, and she'd placed that impossibly small bundle in his arms and said, "She's ours, Danny. We made this." 3 years later, Jennifer was gone, cancer that came fast and merciless, and Grace had become not just his daughter, but his entire reason for existing. Now that reason was on an operating table, her body opened up, her life hanging in the balance between skilled hands and fate's cruel whims. Daniel pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, trying to stop the spinning in his head. The waiting room walls seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights too bright, the antiseptic smell too strong. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. Outside, Riverbend slept under a blanket of darkness, streetlights casting orange pools on empty roads. Somewhere out there, a drunk driver was probably sleeping off his mistake in a jail cell, completely unaware that he'd shattered someone's world tonight. Daniel's hands curled into fists. The anger felt good, clean, better than the helpless terror that threatened to drown him. But anger wouldn't help Grace. Nothing he could do right now would help Grace except wait and trust that the doctors, that Lena, would bring her back to him. The thought of Lena made his chest tighten in a different way. She'd walk through those doors with such confidence, such certainty, as if her presence alone could tip the scales in Grace's favor. Maybe it could. Maybe the universe did work in mysterious ways, arranging lives and debts and second chances in patterns too complex for human minds to understand. Or maybe it was all random chaos, and he was grasping at cosmic meaning where none existed. "Mr. Ward?" A voice pulled him from his thoughts. Daniel turned to see a young nurse, different from the others, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "I brought you some coffee. It's not great, but it's hot." "Thank you." He took the styrofoam cup, wrapping both hands around its warmth, even though the waiting room wasn't cold. "Have you heard anything?" "Not yet, but no news is often good news in surgery. If there were complications, someone would have come out." She hesitated, then added, "Lena Brooks is in there with your daughter, right? She's incredible. One of the best surgical nurses we have. If she's watching over Grace, you can breathe a little easier." Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. The nurse gave his arm a gentle squeeze and left him alone again. He returned to his chair, coffee cooling in his hands, untouched. Time continued its strange distortion. The clock hands moved but felt stuck. Daniel's phone remained off. He couldn't handle Emma's mother's apologies or anyone else's concern. This vigil was something he needed to endure alone, in this sterile room that smelled of fear and disinfectant and desperate prayers. At some point, exhaustion pulled him under. Not sleep exactly, but a strange half-consciousness where he was aware of the waiting room around him but also somewhere else, in memories that felt more real than the present moment. Grace at 5, losing her first tooth and insisting they leave it under her pillow even though Daniel had accidentally thrown it away with the bloody napkin. Grace at 7, performing in her first school play, one of 3 trees in the background, but waving at him with such enthusiasm that she'd knocked over another tree. Grace last week, helping him cook dinner, flour in her hair, laughing as she tried to flip a pancake and sent it flying onto the floor instead. All those moments, all those memories couldn't just end. The universe couldn't be cruel enough to let a drunk driver erase an entire future in one moment of senseless impact. "Mr. Ward." Daniel jerked awake. When had he actually fallen asleep? To find Dr. Chen standing before him. The surgeon had removed his mask, and his face was lined with exhaustion, but not, Daniel noted with a surge of desperate hope, with grief. Daniel was on his feet instantly. "Grace is out of surgery and stable." Dr. Chen's words came quickly, as if he understood the father's need for immediate reassurance. "We repaired the tear in her spleen and stopped the internal bleeding. She lost a significant amount of blood, but the transfusions were successful. She's being moved to pediatric ICU now." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. He grabbed the back of the chair to steady himself. "She's okay? She's really okay?" "She's not out of the woods yet. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical. We need to watch for infection, ensure there's no additional bleeding, monitor her recovery. But Mr. Ward, she made it through surgery. That's the biggest hurdle, and she cleared it. When can I see her?" "Soon. The nurses are getting her settled in ICU. Someone will come get you in about 20 minutes. Dr. Chen placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Your daughter is strong. She fought hard in there, and she had an excellent surgical team. Lena Brooks insisted on being part of the procedure despite being on medical leave. She monitored every vital sign, anticipated every need. I've worked with her for years, but I've never seen her quite so focused. Your daughter had a guardian angel in that operating room. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Where is she? Lena? Still with Grace, I believe, making sure she's comfortable before she's transferred. Dr. Chen squeezed his shoulder once more. Try to breathe, Mr. Ward. The worst is behind you. After the surgeon left, Daniel did try to breathe, deep, shaking breaths that didn't quite fill his lungs but were better than the shallow gasps he'd been managing for hours. Grace was alive. She'd made it through surgery. She was going to be okay. He wanted to cry, to shout, to fall to his knees and thank every deity he'd been bargaining with for the past 4 hours. Instead, he just stood there, trembling as wave after wave of relief crashed over him. Exactly 18 minutes later, Daniel counted each one. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Ward, you can see Grace now. Follow me. The walk to the pediatric ICU felt surreal. They passed through corridors Daniel vaguely remembered from that night 3 weeks ago, though everything looked different in the harsh fluorescent light of 5 a.m. The nurse led him through a set of secure doors into a wing where machines beeped and hummed with quiet vigilance. She's in room 4. She's still under anesthesia, so she won't wake for a while. But you can sit with her. The nurse paused. Mr. Ward, the tubes and machines can look scary, but they're helping her heal. Try not to let the equipment frighten you. Daniel nodded and pushed open the door to room 4. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight of his daughter in that hospital bed. Grace looked even smaller than she had in the emergency room, dwarfed by the equipment surrounding her. An IV drip connected to her hand. A nasogastric tube ran through her nose. Monitors tracked her heart rate and oxygen levels, and her small chest rose and fell with mechanical precision that terrified and reassured him in equal measure. But she was breathing. Her heart was beating. The numbers on the monitors stayed steady and strong. Daniel approached the bed slowly, as if moving too fast might shatter this fragile moment. He reached out and touched Grace's hand, carefully, so carefully, and felt the warmth of living skin beneath his fingers. Hey, baby girl, he whispered. Daddy's here, just like I promised. A sound behind him made Daniel turn. Lena stood in the doorway, still in her surgical scrubs, the cast on her arm now covered with a sterile sleeve. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale, but when she saw Grace breathing steadily in the bed, something in her expression softened. She did great, Lena said quietly, stepping into the room. Real fighter, your daughter. Her vitals stayed strong through the whole procedure. Dr. Chen said she has the heart of a lion. He said you were amazing in there, that you wouldn't leave her side. Daniel's voice cracked. Lena, I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know how to start. You don't have to thank me. This is what I do. It's why I became a nurse. She moved to the other side of Grace's bed, checking the monitors with professional efficiency, even though other nurses had surely already done the same. But I won't pretend it wasn't personal. When I saw her chart, when I realized this was your daughter, she paused, blinking back tears. I couldn't not be there. Does that make sense? Yeah. Daniel looked down at Grace, at the rise and fall of her chest. It makes perfect sense. They stood in silence for a moment, on opposite sides of the bed, two people bound together by impossible circumstances and the small girl sleeping between them. The morning sun was starting to paint the sky outside the window in shades of pink and gold, washing away the darkness that had held them both captive through the longest night of their lives. You should go home, Lena said finally. Get some rest. She won't wake for several hours, and you need to take care of yourself. I'm not leaving her. Daniel, I promised her I wouldn't leave. I'm staying right here until she opens her eyes. His tone left no room for argument. Lena studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but at least sit down. There's a chair that reclines. You can rest without leaving the room. She showed him how to adjust the chair beside Grace's bed, brought him a blanket and pillow from a supply closet, and made sure he had water and knew how to call a nurse if anything changed. Her care was professional but touched with something warmer, something that felt like genuine concern. I'm off duty now, she said, but I'll check on her throughout the day. And Daniel? You did good. Getting her here so fast, staying strong for her. You're a good father. After Lena left, Daniel settled into the chair, his hand resting lightly on Grace's arm, where he could feel her pulse beating steadily beneath her skin. The monitors beeped their reassuring rhythm. Outside the window, Riverbend woke up, cars appearing on roads, lights flicking on in buildings, the world continuing its rotation despite the fact that Daniels had nearly stopped spinning just hours before. He must have dozed because suddenly voices were pulling him back to consciousness. The room was brighter now, full daylight streaming through the window. A nurse was checking Grace's vitals while another adjusted her IV. Daniel sat up quickly, alert to any sign of distress. "She's doing well," one of the nurses assured him. "All her numbers look good. Dr. Chen will be by to check on her around 9. After they left, Daniel stood and stretched, his body stiff from the uncomfortable chair. He moved to Grace's bedside and studied her face. The bruising looked worse in daylight, purple and yellow spreading across her cheekbone. The cut above her eyebrow had been neatly stitched, but underneath the injuries, she was still his Grace, still his baby girl. "You're going to be okay," he told her, even though she couldn't hear him. "We both are." Throughout the morning, medical staff came and went. Doctors consulted charts. Nurses changed IV bags. A phlebotomist drew blood for testing. Daniel watched it all with hawk-like attention, questioning anything he didn't understand, demanding explanations for every beep and alarm. The staff were patient with him, understanding that fear made people need control where they could find it. Around noon, Grace's eyelids began to flutter. Daniel was on his feet immediately, leaning over the bed. "Gracie, baby, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. She tried to speak but couldn't around the tube in her nose. Panic flashed across her face. "It's okay. It's okay." Daniel kept his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "You're in the hospital. You had surgery. That tube is helping you breathe. Don't fight it. Just relax. I'm right here." A nurse appeared within seconds. They'd been monitoring from outside. "Grace, sweetie, you're safe. Your dad is here. Can you squeeze his hand for me?" Grace's small fingers tightened around Daniel's. The relief that flooded through him was almost painful in its intensity. "That's perfect. You're doing so well." The nurse checked her monitors, made some notes. "I'm going to page Dr. Chen. Grace, you're going to feel pretty uncomfortable for a while, but we're giving you medicine for the pain. Just try to stay calm, okay?" Over the next hour, Grace drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she woke, Daniel was there, speaking softly to her, holding her hand, reminding her that she was safe and loved. The tubes came out that afternoon, and being able to see her face fully again, to hear her voice, even if it was just whispered requests for water or complaints that everything hurt, felt like a gift he hadn't earned but would cherish anyway. "Daddy," she croaked that evening, "was I in an accident?" Daniel had been dreading this question. "Yes, baby. The car you were in got hit by another car, but you're safe now. You're going to be okay." "Emma?" "Emma and the other kids just had bumps and bruises. You were the unlucky one who got hurt worse." He stroked her hair gently. "But you're strong. You're going to heal up good as new." "My stomach hurts." "I know. That's where they had to do surgery, but it's going to get better every day." She was quiet for a moment, processing. "I was scared." "Me too, Gracie. Me too." Daniel blinked back tears. "But we're both okay now." That night, Grace's first full night of recovery, Daniel maintained his vigil in the chair beside her bed. He dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, every change in the monitor's rhythm. The nurses who came to check on Grace worked quietly around him, and more than one brought him coffee or snacks, silently acknowledging his refusal to leave his daughter's side. Around 3 a.m, during one of his wakeful periods, the door opened softly. Lena slipped in, moving quietly so as not to disturb Grace. She was in regular clothes now, jeans and a sweater, but still had that cast on her arm. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered by way of explanation. "Thought I'd check on our girl." Daniel noticed the hour but didn't comment on it. "She's been awake a few times, in pain, but stable." Lena moved to the bedside and studied the monitors, then Grace's sleeping face. "She looks better. Color's improving." She turned to Daniel. "And you look like hell. When's the last time you ate?" "I don't remember." "There's a decent cafeteria on the second floor. It's open all night. Go get some real food. I'll stay with her." "Lena, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Please, Daniel, let me help. When he hesitated, she added, Grace needs you healthy and functional, not running yourself into the ground. 20 minutes. Get food, stretch your legs, come back. I'll be right here. Something in her tone, gentle but firm, the voice of someone who knew about caring for others and the importance of self-care, made Daniel relent. 20 minutes. If anything changes, I'll call you immediately. Go. The hospital at 3 a.m. was a strange place. Mostly empty corridors, the occasional medical staff member moving with purpose, the ever-present hum of equipment keeping people alive. Daniel made his way to the cafeteria, got a sandwich he didn't taste and coffee he desperately needed, and was back in Grace's room in exactly 18 minutes. Lena was sitting in his chair, her good hand resting lightly on Grace's arm, humming something soft and melodic. She looked up when he entered and smiled. She stirred once, but settled right back down when I talked to her. Lena stood, stretching. You're back quick. Promised 20 minutes. Daniel set his coffee on the bedside table. That song you were humming, I know it. My mom used to sing it to me when I was sick, old Irish lullaby. Lena glanced at Grace. Seemed to help. They stood together in the quiet room, watching Grace sleep, and Daniel felt something shift between them. Not attraction exactly, though Lena was beautiful in an understated way he was only now beginning to notice, but connection, understanding, the recognition of two people who had saved each other's lives in different ways and were now bound together by something neither had asked for, but both seemed willing to accept. I should let you rest, Lena said finally. But Daniel, I'm going to keep checking on Grace, not just as a nurse, but as someone who cares, if that's okay with you. It's more than okay. Daniel's voice was rough with exhaustion and emotion. It means everything. After she left, Daniel settled back into his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time since that phone call had shattered his world 36 hours earlier, he felt something close to peace. Grace was alive. She was healing. And somehow, impossibly, they had Lena watching over them both. The next morning brought Dr. Chen with good news. No signs of infection, vitals are strong, she's tolerating liquids well. If this continues, we can move her out of ICU to a regular pediatric room by tomorrow. And when can she come home? Daniel asked. If all goes well, maybe 5 to 7 days. She'll need several weeks of recovery at home, no strenuous activity, follow-up appointments. But she's young and resilient. Kids bounce back from this kind of thing better than adults. Dr. Chen smiled. Your daughter is doing remarkably well, Mr. Ward. Try to relax a little. Relaxing felt impossible, but Daniel tried. He let the nurses shoo him out of the room for 20 minutes while they bathed Grace and changed her bedding. He called Mrs. Chen to explain what had happened and arrange for her to bring him clean clothes. He even managed to eat an entire meal in the cafeteria instead of just picking at hospital food. When he returned to Grace's room, he found her awake and looking marginally better. The pallor had faded from her face, replaced by a hint of color. She even managed a small smile when she saw him. Hey, Daddy. Hey, baby girl. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a car. Her attempt at humor made his heart soar even as it broke. Technically, you did. Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to jostle her. But you're tough, tougher than your old man. Dad? Her voice turned serious. That nurse who was here this morning, the nice one with the broken arm, she said she knows you. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Yeah, we met a few weeks ago. She said you saved her life. Is that true? He should have known Grace would ask. Should have prepared an answer. There was an accident at the hospital. She was trapped, and I helped her get out. It wasn't as dramatic as it sounds. Grace studied him with those two knowing eyes. The explosion. From the newspaper. That was you, wasn't it? The mystery man. Gracie, it was. Her certainty left no room for argument. And now she's helping you take care of me. Because you helped her. I guess so. That's nice. Grace's eyes were already drifting closed again. I like her. She has a nice smile. As his daughter fell back asleep, Daniel sat there processing her words. Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying went. Grace had summed up in 2 sentences what Daniel had been trying to understand for days. This strange symmetry of debt and grace, of lives saved and lives returned, of a connection that defied simple explanation. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Daniel stayed with Grace around the clock, only leaving her room for brief necessities. Mrs. Chen brought him changes of clothes and updates from home. Mike called to say his job was secure and not to worry about work until Grace was fully recovered. Emma's mother sent flowers and another tearful apology that Daniel accepted with more grace than he felt. And Lena came by every day, sometimes during her official shifts, checking Grace's vitals with professional efficiency. Other times during her off hours, bringing coloring books and puzzles to help entertain a bored 8-year-old who was feeling well enough to be restless, but not well enough to get out of bed. She never stayed long, never intruded, but her presence became something Daniel realized he was looking forward to, a bright spot in the long hospital days. Grace adored her. Nurse Lena became a frequent topic of conversation, and Daniel noticed his daughter's face light up whenever Lena appeared in the doorway. They had an easy rapport, Lena treating Grace neither like a baby nor like an adult, but with perfect 8-year-old respect. On the 4th day, while Grace was dozing and Lena was adjusting the flowers Mrs. Chen had brought, Daniel finally voiced what had been building inside him. "Why are you doing all this?" Lena looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "The extra visits, bringing Grace stuff, checking on her when you're not even on duty. You've gone way beyond what any nurse would do. Why?" She was quiet for a moment, her good hand resting on the edge of Grace's bed. "You really want to know?" "Yeah, I do. Because 3 weeks ago, I was lying under a steel beam, breathing in smoke, convinced I was going to die. And then this stranger appeared out of nowhere and refused to give up on me. Even though it was dangerous, even though he had every reason to save himself and run, he stayed. He lifted something that should have been impossible to lift. He carried me out of that fire. And then he disappeared before I could even learn his name." Lena's voice grew thick with emotion. "Do you have any idea what that does to a person, Daniel? Knowing that someone valued your life enough to risk their own? I spent 2 weeks trying to find you, not because I wanted to repay some debt, but because I needed to understand who you were. What kind of person does something like that? I told you before, I'm not anyone special. That's where you're wrong." She moved closer, her eyes locked on his. "You're special. You're a father who works himself to exhaustion to provide for his daughter. A man who runs toward danger instead of away from it. Someone who saves lives and then slips away like it means nothing." She glanced at Grace. "And when I found out your daughter was hurt, when I saw you in that waiting room looking like your world was ending, I couldn't not help. Because maybe this is how the universe balances things. You gave me my life back. Let me help protect yours." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "I don't deserve that kind of loyalty." "Yes, you do. You just don't know it yet." Lena smiled softly. "Besides, I really like your kid. She reminds me of myself at that age. Stubborn, curious, stronger than she looks." "She is all those things," Daniel agreed, his own smile breaking through. They fell into comfortable silence, both watching Grace sleep. Outside the window, Riverbend continued its daily rhythms, but in this room, time felt suspended, a pocket of peace carved out of chaos. On the 6th day, Dr. Chen gave them the news they'd been waiting for. "Grace is ready to go home. Continue the antibiotics. No heavy lifting or strenuous activity for at least 4 weeks. Follow-up appointment in 1 week. Any questions?" Daniel had 1,000 questions, but they all boiled down to one. "She's really okay? Completely?" "She will be. Kids are resilient, Mr. Ward. By Christmas, this will just be a story she tells her friends." Dr. Chen shook his hand. "You did good getting her here so fast. That made all the difference." The discharge process took most of the afternoon. Paperwork, medication instructions, a wheelchair ride to the hospital entrance that Grace pretended to hate but secretly enjoyed. Lena appeared just as they were getting ready to leave, still in her scrubs from a shift, her cast now covered in Grace's artwork and get-well messages. "Couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," she said, crouching down to Grace's level. "You're one tough cookie, kid. Take care of that dad of yours, okay?" "Will you come visit us?" Grace asked, her eyes hopeful. "At our house?" Lena glanced at Daniel, a question in her expression. He found himself nodding before he could overthink it. Yeah, you should come by for dinner or something when you're free. I'd like that. Lena stood, and impulsively Grace threw her arms around the nurse's waist in a fierce hug. Thank you for helping me not die, Grace said matter-of-factly. Lena laughed through sudden tears. You're welcome, sweetheart. Any time. As Daniel pushed the wheelchair toward the exit, Grace chattering excitedly about going home and seeing Mrs. Chen and sleeping in her own bed, he looked back once. Lena stood in the hospital corridor, her broken arm in its cast, watching them leave. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement, a promise, a beginning of something neither had planned but both seemed willing to explore. Whatever it was, Daniel thought as they emerged into the autumn sunshine, it felt like hope. The house felt different when they got home. Daniel pushed open the front door, Grace walking slowly beside him with one hand pressed against her healing incision, and the familiar space of their small duplex seemed both exactly the same and completely transformed. Mrs. Chen had been busy. The place was spotless. Fresh flowers sat on the kitchen table, and there was a casserole in the fridge with reheating instructions taped to the lid. Welcome home, sweet girl, Mrs. Chen appeared from the hallway, her eyes wet with tears. She'd been watering their neglected houseplants, Daniel realized. I've been so worried. Let me look at you. Grace submitted to a gentle inspection, Mrs. Chen clucking over the bruises that were finally fading from purple to yellow-green. You gave us all quite a scare, young lady, but you're home now, safe and sound. Thanks for taking care of everything, Daniel said, his voice rough with gratitude he couldn't quite express. In the past week, he'd learned exactly how much he relied on the kindness of others. Mrs. Chen watching the house, Mike holding his job, the hospital staff going above and beyond, and Lena, always Lena, appearing when he needed her most. Don't be silly. This is what neighbors do. Mrs. Chen gathered her things. I made enough casserole for 3 days. There's also soup in the freezer and bread in the bread box. You just focus on getting this little one healthy again. After she left, Daniel helped Grace settle on the couch with pillows arranged to support her back. She looked so small against the cushions, still pale despite her improvement, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of pain and interrupted sleep. But she was home, she was alive. Everything else was details. Can I watch TV? Grace asked hopefully. You can do whatever you want today. Daniel tucked a blanket around her. Within reason. No skateboarding or rock climbing. She giggled, the first real laugh he'd heard from her since before the accident. Dad, I can barely walk to the bathroom. Give it time. You'll be back to normal before you know it. He hoped that was true. Dr. Chen had been optimistic, but Daniel had seen the discharge papers, the long list of potential complications to watch for. What do you want to watch? They spent the afternoon on the couch together, Grace drifting in and out of sleep while animated movies played on the TV. Daniel found himself studying her face during the quiet moments, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her eyelashes rested against her skin, the small scar above her eyebrow that would fade but never completely disappear. She'd carry that mark forever, a reminder of how close he'd come to losing her. Around 5, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text. He'd been getting them periodically since Grace's discharge. Mike checking in, Mrs. Chen asking if they needed anything, Emma's mother sending another guilt-laden message. But this one made his heart skip. How's the patient doing? Did she survive the car ride home? Lena. Daniel smiled despite himself and typed back, She's good. Tired, but happy to be in her own space. Thanks for checking. The response came quickly. I'm glad. Tell her I said hi. And Daniel? Don't forget to take care of yourself too. He stared at that last line longer than necessary. When was the last time someone had said something like that to him? Not about being strong for Grace or managing the household or dealing with responsibilities, but actually taking care of himself? Jennifer used to say it, back before cancer made her the one who needed caring for. Since then, it had been just him and Grace against the world, and his own needs had fallen so far down the priority list they'd practically disappeared. Who are you texting? Grace's sleepy voice pulled him from his thoughts. Just Nurse Lena. She wanted to make sure you got home okay. She's nice. Grace shifted carefully, wincing. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything, baby. Are you and Lena friends now? The question surprised him. I guess so. Why? Because you smile different when you talk about her, like how you smile in the pictures with Mom. Daniel's breath caught. Grace rarely mentioned Jennifer. She'd only been 5 when her mother died, and her memories were fragmentary at best. That's a pretty big observation, Gracie. Mrs. Chen says I'm perceptive. That means I notice stuff. Grace watched him with those 2 wise eyes. It's okay if you like her, Dad. I like her too. She has kind eyes. Mom would have had kind eyes too, right? Your mom had the kindest eyes I ever saw. Daniel pulled Grace closer, careful of her incision. And yeah, Lena does have kind eyes. But honey, we barely know each other. We're just connected because of some unusual circumstances. The explosion, and then me almost dying. Those are pretty unusual. Grace yawned. I'm just saying, it's okay. You don't have to be alone forever. She fell back asleep before Daniel could formulate a response, leaving him to sit there in the gathering dusk, his daughter warm against his side, processing words that felt far too mature for an 8-year-old to speak. But Grace had always been like that, old beyond her years, forced to grow up faster by circumstances neither of them could control. The days settled into a new rhythm. Daniel took a leave of absence from work. Mike had been surprisingly understanding, even helping him file for emergency family leave. Money would be tight, but Grace needed him home, needed help with everything from bathing to walking to the bathroom. The independence she'd been so proud of had been stripped away by the accident, and Daniel watched her frustration grow as her body refused to cooperate with her will. I hate this, she said on the 3rd day home, after Daniel had to help her get dressed because bending over made her incision pull. I feel like a baby. You're recovering from major surgery. Give yourself some grace. Daniel finished tying her shoes. Last week you couldn't even sit up on your own. Now you're walking around. That's progress, Gracie. Slow progress. Still progress. He kissed the top of her head. Patience, kiddo. Your body's doing amazing work healing itself. You just can't see it yet. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Daniel opened it to find Lena standing on his porch, her arm still in its cast, holding a bag from the local bookstore. Hi. She seemed almost nervous, shifting her weight from foot to foot. I hope this is okay. I know you said I could visit, but I probably should have called first. It's fine. Great, actually. Come in. Daniel stepped aside, noticing how her presence immediately seemed to brighten the space. She wore jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out the gold in her brown eyes, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the severe ponytail she wore at the hospital. Lena! Grace appeared from the hallway, moving slowly but with genuine excitement. You came! I promised I would, didn't I? Lena held up the bag. I brought you something. Hope you like to read. Inside the bag were 3 books, middle-grade novels about adventure and friendship and brave girls doing impossible things. Grace's face lit up as she examined each one. These look so good. Dad, can I start reading now? After dinner. We've got about an hour before Mrs. Chen's casserole is ready. Daniel caught Lena's eye. You're welcome to stay. There's plenty. I don't want to intrude. You're not. The words came out more forcefully than he'd intended, but they were true. Stay. Please. So she did. While Grace settled back on the couch with one of her new books, already disobeying the after-dinner rule, but Daniel let it slide. He and Lena moved to the kitchen. She insisted on helping prepare the salad to go with the casserole, working one-handed with impressive efficiency. How are you managing? Lena asked as she tore lettuce into a bowl. Really managing, not the brave face you put on for everyone else. Daniel paused in his chopping of tomatoes. I'm terrified, he admitted. Every time she winces or moves wrong or looks pale, I think something's going wrong. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's normal. Trauma doesn't end when you leave the hospital. It echoes. Lena's voice was gentle, understanding. After the explosion, I jumped every time I heard a loud noise for weeks. Still do sometimes. Your body remembers fear even when your mind knows you're safe. How do you deal with it? Therapy helps. So does time. And remembering that we're both still here, that's not nothing. She smiled at him. You saved my life, Daniel. I know you don't like hearing it, but it's true. And because of that, I was there to help save Grace's. Maybe that's how we deal with trauma. We turn it into something meaningful. We let it connect us instead of isolate us. They ate dinner together, the three of them around the small kitchen table, and it felt startlingly normal. Grace chattered about her books between careful bites of food. Lena told funny stories from her nursing shifts, and Daniel found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in weeks. The weight he'd been carrying seemed lighter with Lena there, as if she'd picked up one end of his burden without even being asked. After dinner, Grace lasted only 20 minutes before exhaustion claimed her. Daniel carried her to bed. She protested she could walk, but he could see her struggling, and tucked her in with one of the new books on her nightstand. "Today was a good day," Grace murmured, already half asleep. "Lena being here made it better. Can she come back?" "If she wants to. It's up to her, baby." "She wants to, I can tell." Grace's eyes drifted shut. "She looks at you the way you look at her." Before Daniel could process that observation, Grace was asleep, her breathing deep and even. He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest, still marveling at the fact that she was here, alive, healing. When he returned to the living room, he found Lena washing dishes at the sink, her cast covered with a plastic bag to keep it dry. "You don't have to do that," Daniel protested. "I know, but I want to help." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "You're not the only one who runs toward fires, Daniel. Some of us just do it differently." He picked up a dish towel and started drying the clean plates, working in comfortable silence beside her. The domesticity of it struck him, how natural it felt to share this space with her, how easily she'd integrated into their evening. It had been just him and Grace for so long that he'd forgotten what it was like to have another adult presence, someone to share the load with. "Grace says you look at me the way I look at you," Daniel said before he could stop himself. "Whatever that means." Lena's hand stilled in the soapy water. "She's a perceptive kid. That's what Mrs. Chen says." Daniel set down the plate he'd been drying. "Lena, I don't know what's happening here. Between us, I mean. This connection, or whatever it is, scares you?" "Yeah, it does." He turned to face her. "I've been alone for 3 years. Just me and Grace, and that's been enough. It's had to be enough because I couldn't risk anything that might destabilize what we've built. And then you show up, and suddenly nothing feels stable anyway, but in a different way. A way that makes me think maybe alone isn't enough anymore." Lena dried her good hand on a towel, then reached out and touched his arm. "I'm scared too. After the explosion, after almost dying, I've been trying to figure out what I want my life to look like, what matters. And then I met you, or re-met you, I guess, and everything got complicated in ways I wasn't expecting. So what do we do?" "I don't know." Her smile was tentative but genuine. "Maybe we just take it one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just see what happens." "I can do that." Daniel covered her hand with his. "Grace really likes you, by the way. That's not nothing. She doesn't warm up to people easily." "The feeling's mutual. She's an amazing kid. You've done a great job with her." "I've tried. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together." "Welcome to parenting. I'm pretty sure that's universal." Lena squeezed his arm once, then stepped back, creating space between them. "I should go. It's getting late and you both need rest." Daniel walked her to the door, oddly reluctant to see her leave. The house would feel emptier without her in it, he realized. When had that happened? When had Lena Brooks become someone whose absence created a void? At the door, she turned back. "Can I come by again? I don't want to overstep, but I'd like to check on Grace, and you." "Please do. Any time." Daniel meant it. "Fair warning, though, our lives are pretty boring. Work and school and homework and trying to make ends meet. No excitement." "After the month we've had, boring sounds perfect." Lena smiled, then did something unexpected. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, brief, feather light, but it sent warmth spreading through his chest. "Good night, Daniel." He stood in the doorway long after her car disappeared down the street, his hand pressed to the spot where her lips had touched his skin, and felt the careful walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crack. Over the next 2 weeks, Lena became a regular presence in their lives. She'd stop by after her shifts at the hospital, bringing groceries they needed, or books she thought Grace would enjoy. She'd stay for dinner, help with dishes, sit on the couch while Grace showed off her progress, first walking without help, then bending to touch her toes, then doing a careful cartwheel that made Daniel's heart stop, but proved she was truly healing. They never defined what was happening between them. Daniel and Lena existed in this strange liminal space, more than friends, not quite dating, bound together by circumstances that defied normal relationship progression. Sometimes their hands would brush while cooking together, or they'd catch each other's eyes across the room and smile for no reason. Small moments that felt enormous. Grace watched it all with 8-year-old satisfaction, occasionally making comments like, "You should hold her hand, Dad," or, "Lena, did you know my dad makes really good pancakes?" Her matchmaking attempts were transparent and adorable, and surprisingly effective at pushing them towards something neither had quite dared to name yet. 3 weeks after Grace came home from the hospital, Daniel returned to work part-time. Mike had arranged for him to do half-days, allowing him to be home when Grace got back from school. Money was still tight. The hospital bills had started arriving, enormous figures that made Daniel's stomach turn. But they were managing, barely, but managing nonetheless. One evening, as Daniel sat at the kitchen table sorting through the medical bills with mounting despair, Lena arrived for dinner. She took one look at the paperwork spread across the table and frowned. "Daniel, have you applied for hospital financial assistance?" "What?" "Financial assistance. The hospital has programs for people who can't afford their bills. There are forms." She picked up one of the statements. "Oh my God, they're charging you full price for everything? That's not right. You should be getting discounts for emergency services, and Grace's surgery should be partially covered by—" She stopped, realizing Daniel was staring at her. "What?" "I didn't know any of that existed." "Most people don't. The hospital doesn't exactly advertise it." Lena sat down across from him, her expression determined. "Let me help. I know the system. I know who to talk to. These bills can be negotiated, reduced. You shouldn't have to go bankrupt because a drunk driver hit your daughter." "Lena, I can't ask you to You're not asking. I'm offering." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Please let me help. You saved my life. Let me save your financial future." Over the next few days, Lena worked magic. She made calls, filled out paperwork, negotiated with billing departments using insider knowledge and professional courtesy. She got Grace's surgery costs reduced by 60%, had the emergency room fees waived entirely, and set up a payment plan for the remaining balance that Daniel could actually manage. "How did you do that?" he asked, staring at the revised bills in disbelief. "I told you, I know the system, and I know people." Lena smiled. "Also, I may have mentioned in passing that you're the hero who saved multiple lives during the explosion. That bought you some goodwill." "I'm not a hero. We've had this argument before. I won then, too." She leaned against the counter, looking pleased with herself. "Accept the help, Daniel. Let yourself be saved for once." That weekend, Daniel finally did something he'd been avoiding. He invited Lena to stay the whole day, not just for dinner, but for breakfast and lunch and everything in between. Grace was ecstatic, immediately dragging Lena to her room to show off her recovered mobility through an elaborate dance routine she'd been practicing. "She's really bounced back," Lena observed as they watched Grace perform, her movements still a bit stiff but essentially normal. "Kids are incredible that way. A month ago she was in ICU, and now look at her." Miracle of modern medicine, and one very skilled surgical nurse. Daniel glanced at her. "How's your arm?" "Better. Cast comes off next week. I'm cleared to return to full duties at the hospital." She flexed her fingers. "Can't wait to have both hands back." "Will you still have time to visit? Once you're back full-time?" The vulnerability in his voice surprised them both. Lena turned to face him fully, her expression soft. "Daniel, I'll make time, if you want me to." "I do." The words were simple but weighted with meaning. "Grace does too." "Just Grace?" Her tone was teasing, but her eyes were serious. Before Daniel could answer, Grace finished her routine with a dramatic bow. "What did you think? Was I good?" "You were amazing," Lena applauded enthusiastically. 10 out of 10, would watch again. They spent the day together doing ordinary things, making pancakes for breakfast, watching movies, playing board games that Grace won through what Daniel suspected was creative rule interpretation. It felt like family, Daniel realized with a jolt. Not his and Grace's usual two-person unit, but something larger, warmer, more complete. That evening, after Grace went to bed, Daniel and Lena sat on the porch steps in the cool November air, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Riverbend was quiet around them, most neighbors already settled in for the night. "I've been thinking," Lena said quietly, "about that night in the hospital, the explosion." "Yeah?" "If it hadn't happened, if there'd been no gas leak, no fire, we never would have met. You would have dropped off your reports and left. I would have finished my shift and gone home. Our lives would never have intersected." Daniel considered this. Butterfly effect. One small change and everything's different. Exactly. And I know it's probably wrong to be grateful for something that could have killed us both, but I can't help it. Because if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't know you or Grace. My life would be smaller, emptier, and I wouldn't even know what I was missing. I feel the same way. Daniel reached out and took her hand, not the brief, casual touches they'd shared before, but deliberately, intentionally. About the accident with Grace, "It was the worst night of my life, but it brought you into our lives in a way that nothing else could have. And I can't regret that, even though I wish Grace had never been hurt." Lena's fingers intertwined with his. "We're a mess, aren't we? Bonding over trauma and near-death experiences." "Maybe, but we're a mess together." Daniel turned to look at her, really look at her. In the porch light, her face was soft, beautiful, open in a way he hadn't seen before. "Lena, I don't know how to do this. Haven't dated since Jennifer. Haven't even thought about it. But with you, I want to try. If you're willing to be patient with someone who's completely out of practice." "I'm willing." She smiled, then leaned her head against his shoulder. "We'll figure it out together. No rush, no pressure. Just us, taking it one day at a time." They sat there for a long time, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. Inside, Grace slept peacefully, healing more every day. Around them, Riverbend dreamed its small-town dreams. And in the space between heartbeats, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 long years: hope for a future that included more than just survival. The following week brought Lena's cast removal. Daniel and Grace met her at the hospital after the appointment, finding her in the lobby, flexing her newly freed arm with a look of pure joy. "Freedom," she announced dramatically. "I can type with both hands again. I can tie my own shoes. I can—" She stopped, noticing them watching her with matching grins. "What?" "You're adorable when you're excited," Daniel said before he could stop himself. Lena blushed, but looked pleased. "Well, I'm extremely excited. This cast was driving me crazy. Come on, let's celebrate. Ice cream on me." They went to a small parlor near the hospital, the kind of old-fashioned place with checkered floors and a jukebox in the corner. Grace ordered a sundae large enough for 3 people. Lena got mint chocolate chip, and Daniel stuck with vanilla because some things didn't need to be complicated. "So," Grace said around a mouthful of ice cream, "are you guys dating now?" Daniel choked on his vanilla. Lena laughed, apparently unbothered by the 8-year-old's directness. "That's a good question, Grace. What do you think?" Lena looked at Daniel, one eyebrow raised in challenge. "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that we're taking things slow and figuring out what we mean to each other." "That's adult speak for yes," Grace informed Lena sagely. "He does this thing where he uses too many words instead of just saying what he means." "I've noticed." Lena's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Your dad's very careful with words. It's actually kind of sweet." "It's weird," Grace countered, but she was smiling. "But I like you being around, Lena. You make Dad smile more. And you brought me good books, so I vote yes on the dating thing." "I'm so glad we have your approval," Daniel said dryly, but he was fighting back a grin. "You should be. I'm very discerning." Grace took another enormous bite of sundae. "That means picky. Mrs. Chen taught me that word." Later, after they'd dropped Grace at home with Mrs. Chen, she had homework to finish, and they were going out for just an hour, Daniel had explained, feeling oddly guilty about leaving her even for that short time. Daniel drove Lena to the overlook on the east side of town. Riverbend spread out below them, its lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. "I used to come here with Jennifer," Daniel said quietly, staring out at the view. "Back when we were dating, before Grace. We'd sit in the truck bed and talk for hours about everything and nothing." "You don't talk about her much," Lena observed. "Your wife." It's hard. She was. Daniel paused, searching for words. She was everything. My best friend, my partner, the best mom Grace could have asked for. And then she got sick, and it happened so fast. By the time they diagnosed the cancer, it had already spread. 9 months from diagnosis to... He couldn't finish the sentence. Lena took his hand. I'm so sorry. The worst part was watching her worry about us. She was dying, and she spent her last weeks making sure I knew how to do Grace's hair, writing birthday cards for years in the future, recording video messages for all the milestones she'd miss. She faced death by trying to make sure we'd be okay without her. And have you been? Okay? Daniel thought about it. Surviving, mostly. Taking care of Grace, working, paying bills, going through the motions. I loved Jennifer with everything I had, and when she died, part of me died too. I didn't think I'd ever feel anything like that again. Didn't want to, honestly. It hurt too much. And now? Lena's voice was barely a whisper. Now I'm terrified. Daniel turned to face her. Because I'm starting to feel things again, Lena. For you, and I don't know if I'm ready. Don't know if I'll ever be ready. But I also don't want to let fear stop me from living, because that's not what Jennifer would have wanted. She wrote me a letter, made me promise not to read it until a year after she died. In it, she said, don't you dare shut yourself away. Find someone who makes you laugh, who loves Grace, who reminds you that life is still worth living. I want you to be happy, Danny. Promise me you'll try. Tears streamed down Daniel's face. He hadn't cried like this since Jennifer's funeral, but somehow, with Lena, it felt safe. She pulled him close, and he buried his face in her shoulder, letting out 3 years of grief and loneliness and desperate, exhausted strength that had finally found a safe place to break. I'm not asking you to replace her, Lena said when his tears finally subsided. I could never do that, and I wouldn't want to try. Jennifer will always be Grace's mom, always be part of your history. But Daniel, there's room in your heart for both grief and new joy. They can exist together. How are you so wise? Daniel pulled back, wiping his eyes self-consciously. Catholic upbringing and a minor in psychology. She smiled, then grew serious. But mostly, I just know what it's like to be given a second chance at life. That explosion could have killed me. Instead, it led me to you. I'm not wasting this chance, Daniel. I'm not wasting this connection, whatever it becomes, however long it takes. I'm in. If you'll have me. Daniel looked at her, really looked at this woman who'd crashed into his life through smoke and fire and accident, who'd saved his daughter, who'd saved him too, in ways he was only beginning to understand. And he realized that being ready wasn't about no longer loving Jennifer. It was about honoring her memory by choosing to live fully, to open his heart to possibility, to be brave enough to risk pain for the chance at joy. I'll have you, he said simply, if you'll be patient with me, if you'll understand that some days will be harder than others, if you'll love Grace as fiercely as I do. Those are the easiest promises I've ever made. Lena cupped his face in both hands, newly freed from the cast that had marked her healing, and kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, then deeper as 3 years of loneliness met weeks of growing connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. So we're really doing this, dating, whatever comes next? We're really doing this. Lena laughed, the sound pure and joyful. Fair warning, I'm a terrible cook. I work weird hours and I cry at dog food commercials. I burn toast, I overthink everything, and I come with an 8-year-old who will absolutely interrogate you about your intentions. Daniel grinned. Still in? Still in. She kissed him again, quick and sweet. Now take me home so we can tell Grace that yes, we're officially dating. I want to see her face. Grace's face, when they told her later that evening, was pure triumph. I knew it. I told you, Dad. I told you she liked you. You're very smart, Lena agreed solemnly. Clearly the brains of this operation. Obviously. Grace bounced on the couch, then winced slightly, still healing, still careful. Does this mean you'll be here more? Like, all the time? Not all the time, Lena said. I have my own place, my own job, but yes, I'll be around more, if that's okay with you. It's very okay. Grace looked between them, her expression suddenly vulnerable. I don't really remember my mom. Dad talks about her sometimes, and there are pictures, but I was too little. Is it bad that I'm excited about you being here? Like, am I betraying her or something? Daniel's heart cracked open. He knelt in front of his daughter, taking both her hands. Oh, Gracie, no, never. Your mom would be so happy that you're letting someone else love you. That's not betrayal. That's the opposite. That's living, which is what she wanted most for both of us. Lena, Grace turned to her. Did you know my mom? No, sweetheart, I didn't. But you'd have liked her. Everyone liked her. Dad says she was the best person he ever met. I'm sure she was. Lena's voice was thick with emotion. And I hope someday I can be half as good to you as she would have been. Grace considered this, then nodded decisively. You're pretty good already. You saved my life, and you make Dad smile, and you bring good books. Mom would approve. That night, after Grace finally went to bed, exhausted from the excitement but happy in a way Daniel hadn't seen since before the accident, he and Lena sat together on the couch. No TV, no distractions, just the two of them in comfortable silence. Thank you, Daniel said finally. For what? For being patient with us. For understanding that this family comes with history and complexity and an 8-year-old who's been through more than any kid should have to handle. Daniel, I don't want simple. I want real. But Lena shifted closer, fitting herself against his side. This, you and Grace, and yes, even Jennifer's memory, this is real. This matters. And after almost dying in that fire, after realizing how fragile and precious life is, I'm done settling for anything less than what matters. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling around them. Outside, Riverbend slept. Inside, a family was slowly, carefully rebuilding itself into something new and beautiful. The weeks that followed felt like learning to breathe again after being underwater too long. Daniel returned to full-time work, though Mike had been understanding enough to let him adjust his schedule so he could drop Grace at school and be home when she got back. The medical bills, thanks to Lena's intervention, had become manageable. Still significant, but no longer the suffocating weight that had threatened to drown them. And Grace, miraculous Grace, was healing more every day, her body remembering how to be 8 years old instead of a trauma patient. But it was the small moments that Daniel treasured most. Coming home to find Lena already there, helping Grace with homework at the kitchen table. The way his daughter's face lit up when she heard Lena's car in the driveway. The casual intimacy of Lena keeping a toothbrush in his bathroom, of her laughter filling spaces that had been silent too long. Yet underneath the growing happiness, Daniel carried a persistent anxiety he couldn't quite name. It manifested in small ways. Checking Grace's breathing at night even though she was perfectly healthy, tensing whenever his phone rang with an unknown number, the way his heart would race if Lena was even 10 minutes late. He'd almost lost everything twice in the span of a month. Some part of him was waiting for the universe to complete the trifecta. It was Lena who finally called him on it, 3 months after Grace came home from the hospital. They were cooking dinner together. She was attempting to make her grandmother's lasagna while Daniel prepared garlic bread, when he dropped a glass. It shattered across the kitchen floor, and Daniel froze, staring at the fragments like they held some prophetic meaning. Hey, Lena touched his arm gently. It's just a glass. We'll clean it up. Right, yeah, sorry. But his hands were shaking as he reached for the broom. Daniel, stop! She took the broom from him and set it aside. What's going on? And don't say nothing. You've been jumpy for weeks. He leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for the other shoe to drop. It feels like things are too good, and that means something bad is coming. That's trauma talking. Lena's voice was gentle but firm. After everything that's happened, your brain is trying to protect you by expecting the worst. But Daniel, that's not how life works. Bad things happening doesn't mean more bad things are inevitable. Doesn't it, though? The words burst out of him. Jennifer got sick and died. The hospital exploded while I was there. Grace almost died in that accident. What if I'm cursed? What if everyone I love is in danger just by being near me? Stop. Lena moved closer, taking both his hands. Listen to me. None of those things were your fault. Cancer isn't a curse, it's a disease. The explosion was a gas leak, not cosmic punishment. And a drunk driver hit the car Grace was in. That had nothing to do with you. You're not cursed. You're just a man who's been through hell and is still standing. Barely standing. Still counts. She squeezed his hands. Daniel, I need you to hear this. What happened to us? The explosion, meeting each other, Grace's accident, me being there for her surgery. That wasn't about debt or fate or some cosmic ledger being balanced. That was about two people who chose to be brave in impossible moments. You chose to run into that fire. I chose to scrub into that surgery. Those were choices, not destiny. Then why does it feel like we're connected by something bigger than choice? Because trauma bonds people in ways normal circumstances don't. We saw each other at our most vulnerable. That creates intimacy whether we want it or not. Lena paused, then added quietly, but what we're building now, that's choice too. Every day I come here, every time we decide to try this relationship, despite how complicated it is, those are choices. And they matter more than any supposed cosmic connection. Daniel pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I'm terrified of losing you, of losing Grace again, of everything falling apart. I know. But Daniel, you can't protect yourself from loss by pushing away happiness. That's not living. That's just existing. She pulled back to look at him. Your wife knew that. That's why she made you promise to try again. She understood that love is always a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. When did you get so wise? I almost died, remember? Near-death experiences give you perspective. She smiled, then kissed him softly. Now come on, let's clean up this glass and finish dinner before Grace gets back from Emma's house. And Daniel, consider talking to someone, a therapist. They can help with the anxiety better than I can. He did. The following week, Daniel made an appointment with a counselor who specialized in trauma and grief. Dr. Sarah Martinez, no relation to the hospital administrator, as she cheerfully explained, had an office that smelled like lavender and didn't feel clinical. Over the next several sessions, she helped Daniel unpack 3 years of compressed grief. The guilt he carried over Jennifer's death, his terror about Grace's accident, and his fear that allowing himself to be happy with Lena was somehow betraying the life he'd had before. You're not betraying anyone, Dr. Martinez told him during their 4th session. You're honoring your wife by living the life she wanted for you, by being a present father to Grace, by opening your heart to someone new. That takes tremendous courage. It doesn't feel courageous. It feels terrifying. Most courage does. She smiled. But you're doing the work, Daniel. That matters. The work, he discovered, was harder than any construction job he'd ever done. Examining his fears, acknowledging his trauma, learning to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of pushing them down, all of it required a different kind of strength than he was used to. But slowly, session by session, the constant anxiety began to loosen its grip. Meanwhile, life continued its forward motion. Grace returned to school full-time, her physical therapy completed, her scar fading to a thin white line that she'd taken to calling her warrior mark. She and Lena had developed their own relationship, separate from Daniel, inside jokes, shopping trips for books, long conversations about topics Daniel only half understood. Watching them together filled him with a joy so profound it sometimes hurt. One Saturday in early December, Lena suggested they all go Christmas shopping together. Grace was ecstatic, already making lists of decorations they needed and presents she wanted to buy for her friends. Daniel was less enthusiastic, crowds and holiday music and the financial stress of presents, but he agreed because seeing his daughter's excitement was worth any discomfort. The mall was predictably packed, decorated within an inch of its life, playing an endless loop of carols that would be stuck in Daniel's head for days. But Grace dragged them from store to store with infectious enthusiasm, and even Daniel found himself getting into the spirit. Lena had a knack for finding the perfect gifts, pointing out things people would actually want instead of obligatory presents. They were in a bookstore, Grace's favorite destination, when Daniel noticed Lena had disappeared. He found her near the back, staring at a children's book with tears in her eyes. Hey, what's wrong? She showed him the cover. The Velveteen Rabbit. My mom used to read this to me every night when I was Grace's age. I haven't thought about it in years, but seeing it just now... She wiped her eyes. Sorry, I'm being silly. You're not. Daniel pulled her close, not caring that they were in a crowded bookstore. You should get it for yourself. I'm 32. I don't need children's books. Says who? He picked up the book and added it to their basket before she could protest. Sometimes we need reminders of the things that made us feel safe when we were young. Later, in the food court while Grace was occupied with chicken nuggets, Lena reached across the table and took Daniel's hand. I need to tell you something. His stomach dropped. Those words never preceded good news. Okay. The hospital offered me a position in their new surgical wing. It's a promotion, lead surgical nurse, better pay, better hours. But it would mean more responsibility, more time at work, especially the first 6 months while we're setting everything up. That's amazing, Lena. Congratulations. Daniel meant it, even as part of him wondered what this would mean for them. I haven't accepted yet, because I wanted to talk to you first. She squeezed his hand. This relationship, what we're building with you and Grace, it matters to me. A lot. And I don't want to take a job that might make me too busy to be present for you both. So I'm asking what you think. Honestly. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing. Jennifer had given up her career aspirations to take care of Grace when she was small, and she'd never complained, but he'd always wondered if she'd regretted it. If, in some way, cancer had robbed her of more than just years, it had stolen the chance to discover what she might have become. I think, he said slowly, that you should take the job. Not because I don't want you around. I do, more than you know. But because you earned this, Lena. You're brilliant at what you do, and you deserve to be recognized for it. We'll figure out the time management. Grace and I have been a 2-person team for 3 years. We can handle you being busy sometimes. You're sure? I'm sure. He smiled. Besides, Grace will be insufferable if she finds out we held you back from your dream job. She already thinks you walk on water. What about you? Lena's voice was soft, vulnerable. What do you think of me? I think, Daniel said, aware that Grace was at the next table and could probably hear him but not caring, that I'm falling in love with you, and I think that terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure. And I think that you've made our lives infinitely better just by being in them. Lena's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. I'm falling in love with you too, both of you. Is that too fast? We've only been officially dating for 3 months. After what we've been through, nothing's too fast. Daniel kissed her hand. Take the job, Lena. Chase your dreams. We'll be here cheering you on. She accepted the position the following Monday. The celebration dinner they had that night felt like more than just marking her promotion. It felt like a turning point, a commitment to building a life together that honored everyone's dreams and needs. But the universe, as Daniel had learned, had its own timeline for teaching lessons. 2 weeks before Christmas, Grace came down with what they initially thought was a simple flu. She was tired, running a low fever, complaining of stomach pain. Daniel gave her children's Tylenol and kept her home from school, expecting it to pass in a few days like childhood illnesses usually did. By day 3, she wasn't improving. If anything, she seemed worse, pale, listless, barely eating. The fever persisted despite medication. Maybe it's related to her surgery, Lena suggested when she stopped by after her shift. She'd been checking on Grace multiple times a day, her medical training making her more observant than Daniel. There could be complications from the splenectomy. We should take her in, just to be safe. The words "take her in" sent ice through Daniel's veins. He'd promised himself he'd never have to watch Grace wheeled through hospital doors again, but he also trusted Lena's instincts. They took Grace to the emergency room that evening. The same emergency room where Daniel had received the worst phone call of his life 3 months earlier. The same place where Lena had met him with determination in her eyes and a promise to save his daughter. Coming back felt like tempting fate, but the test came back showing not surgical complications but something simpler, appendicitis. Grace's appendix was inflamed and needed to come out, but it hadn't ruptured yet. A straightforward surgery, the doctor assured them. Routine. Daniel still felt like he was drowning. Hey! Lena took his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her. They were in the same surgical waiting room where he'd spent the longest night of his life. This is different. This isn't life-threatening. It's appendicitis. Thousands of kids get their appendix out every year, and they're fine. I can't do this again. I can't sit in this room and wait and wonder if my daughter's going to die. Then don't. Come with me. She pulled him up, leading him out of the waiting room and down a corridor he didn't recognize. They ended up in a small chapel, non-denominational, quiet, empty, except for rows of simple wooden pews and a stained glass window that caught the hallway light. I found this place after the explosion, Lena said quietly. When I was recovering, feeling sorry for myself, angry at the universe for the pain and the fear and the uncertainty. I'm not particularly religious, but something about this space helped, so I'm sharing it with you now. They sat together in the peaceful silence, and Daniel felt something in his chest begin to unclench. I'm sorry. I know I'm being irrational. You said it yourself, routine surgery, not life-threatening. You're being human. You're being a father who loves his daughter and has been through hell. There's no wrong way to feel right now. Lena leaned against him. But Daniel, I need you to hear this. Grace is going to be fine. I know it in my bones, and even if I didn't, even if this was scary and uncertain, we'd get through it together. You're not alone anymore. The surgery took 90 minutes. Daniel paced the chapel for 85 of them, Lena sitting patiently in the pew, occasionally reminding him to breathe. When the surgeon finally came to tell them it had gone perfectly, that Grace was already awake and asking for her dad, Daniel's legs nearly gave out. Grace looked impossibly small in the recovery bed, but she was alert, present, already complaining about being hungry. The doctor says I can't eat for a few hours, she grumbled when Daniel reached her bedside. That's not fair. Surgery makes you hungry. That's not how it works, baby. Daniel kissed her forehead, relief making him giddy. But I promise, as soon as they let you eat, we'll get you whatever you want. Even ice cream for breakfast? Let's not push it. Lena appeared in the doorway, having given them a moment alone. How's our patient? Starving and cranky, so basically normal. Grace reached out her hand to Lena. You were right. My appendix was broken. Inflamed, Lena corrected with a smile. But close enough. You're very brave. You know that? I'm getting kind of tired of being brave. Grace's voice was small suddenly, vulnerable. Can I just be normal for a while? No more hospitals? I think that can be arranged. Daniel looked at Lena, who nodded in agreement. No more hospital visits unless they're social calls to see Lena at work. Deal? Deal. They brought Grace home the next afternoon, a completely different experience from her discharge after the accident. She walked out on her own, only slightly tender around her new incision, already making plans for how to describe this adventure to her friends at school. Daniel drove home slowly, carefully, while Lena sat in back with Grace, the two of them arguing amiably about which Christmas movie they should watch that evening. As Daniel pulled into their driveway, something shifted in his chest. The fear that had been his constant companion for months, the anxiety that more bad things were inevitable, suddenly seemed less substantial. They'd faced another medical crisis, and Grace had come through it fine. Not every hospital visit ended in tragedy. Not every moment of fear resulted in loss. Maybe, Daniel thought as he helped Grace out of the truck, maybe he could start believing that good things didn't have to be temporary. That happiness didn't automatically come with an expiration date. That night, after Grace was asleep on the couch with her promised Christmas movie playing softly, Daniel and Lena sat together on the porch despite the December cold. The neighborhood twinkled with holiday lights, and somewhere down the street, carolers were making their rounds. Thank you, Daniel said quietly, for today, for getting me through it. You would have gotten through it anyway, but I'm glad I could help. Lena pulled her coat tighter. Daniel, I've been thinking about something, about us. His heart rate kicked up. Okay. My lease is up in February, and I've been wondering, she turned to face him, what if I didn't renew it? What if I moved in here instead, with you and Grace? Daniel stared at her, processing. You want to move in? Only if you want me to. I know it's fast, and I know it's complicated with Grace to consider. But I'm here almost every day anyway, and I love you both, and it feels silly to keep paying rent on a place I barely use. She was talking faster now, nervous. But if it's too soon, I completely understand. We can wait. I just thought, yes. The word came out firm, certain, without any of the anxiety Daniel had expected to feel. Yes, I want you to move in. We want you to move in. This house has felt more like a home in the past 3 months than it has in 3 years, and that's because you're in it. You're sure. What about Grace? Grace will be thrilled. She already thinks of you as part of the family. Daniel pulled Lena close, kissing her with 3 months of accumulated love and trust and hope. Move in with us, please. They told Grace the next morning over pancakes. Her reaction was everything Daniel had hoped for and more. Really? You're really moving in? Grace bounced in her chair, then winced and held her incision. Ow! But really? Really, if that's okay with you. Lena watched her carefully. This is your home too, Grace. Your opinion matters. My opinion is yes, 1,000,000 times yes. Grace looked at her father. Dad, can Lena have the office? You never use it anyway, and she could make it pretty. We'll figure out the logistics, Daniel said, laughing. But yeah, probably she can have the office. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a blur of activity. Lena began moving her things in slowly, clothes, books, the small touches that marked a space as truly hers. Grace helped decorate Lena's new room with an enthusiasm that bordered on manic, insisting they needed fairy lights and plants and good vibes. Daniel watched his daughter bloom under the attention of 2 adults who loved her, saw her confidence grow in ways he hadn't been able to foster alone. On Christmas Eve, the 3 of them attended the community tree lighting in downtown Riverbend. Grace, fully recovered from her appendectomy, ran around with friends from school while Daniel and Lena stood together, his arm around her shoulders, watching the tree illuminate against the night sky. I keep thinking about last year, Daniel said quietly. It was just me and Grace, and we were struggling. Money was tight, I was exhausted all the time, and Christmas felt like just another thing to survive. Now look at us. You survived more than Christmas, Daniel. You survived grief and trauma and nearly losing your daughter. You're stronger than you know. Lena kissed his cheek. But I'm glad you don't have to be strong alone anymore. Me too. He turned to face her fully. I know it's only been a few months. I know by any normal timeline, this is moving fast. But Lena, I love you. Completely. And I want to build a life with you. Not just cohabiting, but really building something together. Is that crazy? If it is, we're crazy together. She smiled up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I love you too, both of you. This is the family I didn't know I was looking for. Grace came running back then, pulling them both toward the hot chocolate stand, and the moment passed into the general happiness of the evening. But later, after Grace had gone to bed with visions of presents dancing in her head, Daniel pulled a small box from his desk drawer. It was Jennifer's, he told Lena, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. Her engagement ring. She told me in that letter she wrote, the one I read a year after she died. She said when I was ready to move forward, I should give this ring to whoever I chose to love next. That it would make her happy to know it was still being used to symbolize commitment. Lena's hand went to her mouth. Daniel, I'm not proposing, not yet. We both agreed to take things slow, and I meant that. He closed the box again. But I wanted you to know that I'm serious about this. About us. And when the time is right, when we're both ready, I'd like to ask you properly. With this ring, if you'd want it, or we could get a different one. I just thought... Lena kissed him, stopping the nervous ramble. I'd be honored to wear Jennifer's ring when the time comes. And Daniel, I'm serious about this too. About building a life with you and Grace, about being a family. Christmas morning was chaos in the best possible way. Grace tore through her presents with childlike glee, delighted by everything from books to art supplies to the new bike Daniel and Lena had conspired to get her. They ate pancakes for breakfast and Mrs. Chen's Christmas cookies for lunch, and nobody cared about proper meal timing because it was Christmas, and Grace was healthy and they were together. In the afternoon, while Grace was engrossed in one of her new books, Daniel found Lena in the kitchen making tea. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Thank you for this, he said quietly. For making Christmas feel like magic again, instead of just survival. Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with your heart and your daughter. She turned in his arms. I know this year started with trauma for both of us. The explosion, Grace's accident, but look where we ended up. Heroes find each other, Daniel quoted, remembering what Grace had said months ago at the hospital. That's what Grace told you, right? That heroes find each other? She's a smart kid, Lena smiled. Though I'm not sure either of us are heroes, just two people who made choices and got lucky. No, Daniel shook his head. Grace was right. You ran back into surgery when you were supposed to be on medical leave because you knew my daughter needed the best. I ran into a burning building for someone I didn't know. Those aren't luck. Those are choices that make us exactly what Grace said, heroes who found each other. They stood there in the kitchen, swaying slightly to music only they could hear, while Grace read peacefully in the living room, and outside Riverbend settled into a quiet Christmas afternoon. The past year had been impossibly hard, loss and fear and trauma stacked on top of old grief. But it had also brought them here, to this moment, to this family they were building from fragments of broken lives. Later that evening, after Mrs. Chen had come over for Christmas dinner and Grace had finally crashed from excitement and sugar, Daniel stepped outside onto the porch. The neighborhood was peaceful, lights twinkling on houses up and down the street, the air cold but not unpleasant. Lena joined him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. What are you thinking about? Jennifer, wishing she could see this. See Grace so happy, so healthy. See that I kept my promise to move forward. Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. I think she'd like you. I think she'd be grateful that you're here, loving our daughter, loving me. I'd like to think so too. Lena leaned against him. And Daniel? I don't think you broke any promises to her. I think you honored every single one. You took care of Grace. You stayed strong, and when the time came, you opened your heart again. That took tremendous courage. It was mostly just fear and stubbornness. That too. She laughed. But you're here. We're here. And that's what matters. Inside, through the window, they could see Grace asleep on the couch, her new stuffed animal clutched in her arms. She looked peaceful, healthy, whole. All the things Daniel had feared he might never see again during those desperate hours in the hospital waiting room. You know what the crazy thing is? Daniel said quietly. If that gas leak had never happened, if there had been no explosion that night, I never would have met you. You would have finished your shift, I would have dropped off those reports and gone home, and our lives never would have intersected. Butterfly effect, Lena echoed his words from months ago. One small change and everything's different. Right. And I know I should regret the explosion, should wish it never happened because people got hurt and we both almost died, but I can't, because it brought you into our lives. He turned to face her fully. Is that terrible? To be grateful for trauma because of where it led? I don't think it's terrible. I think it's human. Lena cupped his face in her hands. We can acknowledge that bad things happened and be grateful for the good that came from them. Those ideas aren't mutually exclusive. The explosion was terrifying and painful, but it also led me to you. Grace's accident was the worst night of your life, but it brought us together in a way that nothing else could have. That's not wrong to acknowledge. When did you become so wise? I keep telling you, near-death experiences give perspective. She kissed him softly. Now come inside. It's cold, and I want to give you your Christmas present. We already exchanged presents this morning. This one's different, more private. She pulled him toward the door, her smile mysterious. Inside, after checking that Grace was still soundly asleep, Lena led Daniel to their bedroom, still adjusting to thinking of it as their bedroom instead of just his. She pulled a wrapped package from her closet and handed it to him. It's not much, but I thought you might like it. Daniel unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal, but when he opened it, he realized it wasn't empty. The first page had a photo of him and Grace from before Jennifer died. He didn't even remember Lena having access to his photo albums. The next pages were filled with photos from the past few months. Him and Grace at the hospital, Grace and Lena coloring together, the three of them at the ice cream parlor, a selfie Lena had snuck of him sleeping on the couch with Grace curled against him. Interspersed with the photos were journal entries in Lena's neat handwriting, small observations, funny moments, quotes from Grace, reflections on what this family meant to her. The final page was blank except for one sentence. Here's to the story we're still writing together. Lena, Daniel's voice broke. I don't even have words. You gave me my life back, she said simply. I wanted to show you what you've given me since then. A family, a home, a future I didn't know I wanted until I found it with you both. Daniel pulled her close, the journal pressed between them, and let himself feel the full weight of this gift. Not just the physical book, but what it represented. Someone who saw him, who valued not just the hero who'd run into the fire, but the tired father making pancakes, the man working double shifts to pay bills, the person trying his best and often falling short but never giving up. I love you, he whispered into her hair. So much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. And Daniel? It's okay to be scared. Love is terrifying, but it's also the most worthwhile risk we ever take. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet house, while outside the neighborhood dreamed its Christmas dreams, and inside their daughter slept peacefully, safe and loved and whole. The next morning, Grace woke up early and crawled into bed between them, something she hadn't done since she was very small. Morning, she mumbled, still half asleep. Can we have pancakes again? We had pancakes yesterday, Daniel pointed out. But they're Christmas pancakes. They taste better. That's science. Grace snuggled closer. I'm glad Lena's here. This is the best Christmas we've had in forever. It really is, Lena agreed, reaching across to stroke Grace's hair. Though I think next year we should start a new tradition. What do you think about volunteering at a soup kitchen or shelter? Giving back to the community? Like heroes do? Grace perked up at this. Yeah, we should do that. Dad, can we? We can definitely do that. Daniel looked at these two people who'd become his whole world, feeling gratitude so profound it was almost painful. We can do anything, as long as we're together. And so they did. The months that followed brought new rhythms and new challenges. Lena's promotion meant longer hours initially, but true to their promise, they made it work. Daniel adjusted his schedule, Grace learned to be more independent, and somehow they found balance. Grace thrived with two adults who loved her, her confidence growing as she realized that families could be built in unconventional ways and still be whole. By spring, Grace's scars from both surgeries had faded to thin white lines, warrior marks, she still called them, badges of survival. She told the story of the accident and her recovery to anyone who'd listen, always making sure to mention how Nurse Lena had saved her life, just like her dad had saved Lena's life. It was a story she was proud of, a narrative of connection and courage that made sense to her 8-year-old understanding of the world. On the anniversary of the explosion, a warm evening in late April, Daniel and Lena returned to Riverbend General Hospital. Not as patients or in crisis, but as visitors. The damaged wing had been rebuilt, modernized, safer now, with redundant systems to prevent gas leaks. They walked through the new corridors together, hand in hand, retracing the path Daniel had taken that night when he'd run toward danger instead of away. It looked so different, Lena observed. Hard to believe this was where... She didn't finish the sentence. Where our lives changed forever, Daniel completed. For better or worse? Definitely for better. She squeezed his hand. Though I could have done without the near-death experience part. They found the plaque that had been installed in the new wing, a memorial to that night, honoring the staff who'd responded to the crisis and acknowledging the unnamed civilian who'd rescued trapped personnel. Daniel had refused all interviews, all recognition, but the hospital had insisted on some form of acknowledgement. That's you, Lena said, touching the plaque. The unnamed hero. I prefer to stay unnamed, thanks. Daniel pulled her away from the memorial. Come on, let's go home. Grace said she's making us dinner, which means we're probably having cereal and sandwiches, but the thought counts. Grace was indeed attempting to cook, with Mrs. Chen's supervision, when they arrived home. The kitchen smelled like slightly burned grilled cheese, but the table was set carefully, and their daughter beamed with pride at her accomplishment. I made everything myself, Grace announced. Mrs. Chen just supervised for safety. We've got grilled cheese, tomato soup from a can, but I heated it myself, and cookies from the bakery because I'm not allowed to use the oven alone yet. It's perfect, Lena assured her. Best meal I've had all week. They ate together, the four of them. Mrs. Chen had been invited to stay because she'd become so integral to their lives. And it felt like family. Not the traditional configuration, not what any of them had planned, but real and solid and full of love. After dinner, while Grace showed Mrs. Chen her latest art project, Daniel pulled Lena into the hallway. His heart was racing, his palms sweating, but he knew the time was right. "Lena, I need to ask you something." She turned, curious. "Okay?" Daniel pulled out the small box he'd shown her months ago, Jennifer's ring, simple and elegant and full of history. "I know we said we'd take our time, and we have. It's been almost 9 months since we officially started dating, 6 months since you moved in, and I know that's still fast by normal standards, but nothing about us has ever been normal." "Daniel." Lena's eyes were already filling with tears. "Let me finish." He smiled, nervous but certain. "You saved my daughter's life. You saved me too, in ways that had nothing to do with medical intervention. You walked into our broken, grieving lives and helped us remember how to be whole. You love Grace like she's your own. You make me laugh and challenge me to be better, and remind me every day that it's okay to be happy again." He got down on one knee, right there in the hallway of their small duplex, and opened the box. "Lena Brooks, will you marry me? Will you officially become part of this weird, wonderful family we've built from trauma and courage and love?" "Yes." The word came out choked with emotion. "Yes, absolutely yes." Daniel slipped Jennifer's ring onto Lena's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all this time for exactly this moment. Lena pulled him up and kissed him, and from the living room they heard Grace's delighted shriek. "I knew it! Mrs. Chen, I told you he was going to propose. Pay up!" "You bet on my proposal," Daniel called, laughing through happy tears. Grace appeared in the hallway, bouncing with excitement. "Mrs. Chen said he'd wait until summer. I said he'd do it before May. I was right." She threw herself at Lena. "You're really going to be my stepmom? For real official?" "For real official," Lena confirmed, hugging her tight. "If that's okay with you, it's the best." Grace pulled back, suddenly serious. "Do you think my mom would be okay with this? With you marrying Dad and being my new mom?" Daniel knelt down to his daughter's level. "I think your mom would be thrilled. She loved you more than anything, and she wanted you to have people in your life who loved you just as much. Lena does, and I think Mom would be grateful for that." "Okay, good." Grace hugged them both. "Because I really love Lena, and I don't want to feel bad about it." "You never have to feel bad about love," Lena told her gently. "Love doesn't replace other love. It just adds to it. You can love your mom's memory and love me at the same time. There's room in your heart for both." That night, after Grace finally went to bed, too excited to sleep but eventually crashing hard, Daniel and Lena sat together on the porch, their usual spot for important conversations. Lena kept looking at the ring on her finger, smiling every time the porch light caught the diamond. "We should probably set a date," she said, "though I'm flexible, whenever feels right. How about next spring? That gives us a year to plan, to let Grace really adjust to the idea, to do this right." Daniel pulled her closer. "Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. Maybe here, in the backyard. What do you think?" "I think it sounds perfect." Lena kissed him softly. "A year from now, we'll stand in our backyard and promise to love each other forever, with Grace as our witness. I can't imagine anything better." "Me neither." Daniel looked up at the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. "You know, a year and a half ago, I was convinced my life was over, that I'd lost everything that mattered when Jennifer died, and all I could do was survive for Grace's sake. I never imagined I could be this happy again." Life has a way of surprising us, usually in terrible ways, but sometimes the surprises are beautiful. Lena rested her head on his shoulder. "We got lucky, Daniel. In the midst of all that trauma and fear, we found each other. That's not nothing. That's everything," he corrected. They sat there long into the night, making plans and dreams and promises, while inside their daughter slept peacefully, and all around them Riverbend dreamed its small-town dreams. The past year had been impossible, full of pain and fear and moments when survival seemed like the best they could hope for. But they'd made it through. Not just survived, but thrived, building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate lives. Daniel thought about that night in the hospital corridor, smoke thick in his lungs, flames licking at the walls, and the choice he'd made to run forward instead of back. He thought about Grace on that operating table, Lena refusing to leave her side despite being on medical leave. He thought about all the moments of courage and connection that had led them here, to this porch, to this family, to this future they were building together. Sometimes he realized fate didn't trade debts or balance cosmic ledgers. Sometimes it just connected hearts that were always meant to meet. Sometimes heroes really did find each other, not through grand design, but through simple choices to show up, to be brave, to say yes to love, even when everything in your history said it was safer to say no. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between one breath and the next, you could feel the universe smiling, acknowledging that yes, this was right, this was good, this was exactly how broken things were meant to heal. "What are you thinking?" Lena asked, noticing his silence. "That I'm grateful for the explosion, as terrible as that sounds, for Grace's accident, even though it nearly killed me with fear, for every impossible circumstance that brought us together." Well, Daniel kissed the top of her head. "I'm grateful for all of it because it led me to you." "Me too." Lena lifted her hand, admiring the ring in the starlight. "Here's to new beginnings, to families built from courage, to heroes who find each other." "To us," Daniel agreed, "to the story we're still writing together." And somewhere in the house behind them, Grace dreamed of weddings and families and a future so bright it made the past's darkness worthwhile. Because that's what love did. It transformed tragedy into triumph, turned survivors into heroes, and proved that sometimes the best things in life came from the moments when you chose to run toward the fire instead of away from it. The story that had started with an explosion in the rain, with smoke and fear and a stranger's desperate cry for help, had become something neither Daniel nor Lena could have predicted. Not a tale of debt and repayment, but of connection and courage, and the beautiful complexity of human hearts learning to open again after trauma. And as the stars wheeled overhead, and Riverbend slept, and two people who'd saved each other's lives planned their future together, the universe offered no guarantees, no promises that more bad things wouldn't happen. But it offered something better, the certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Not alone, not afraid, but as a family bound by something stronger than fate or destiny or cosmic design. They were bound by choice, by love, by the simple, profound decision to keep showing up for each other, day after day, no matter what. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?